Modern printing press, I impasse de log lice. Imprint oral date. 3rd December 1907. Browant. Vice General Monsignor Chabot, Prelate of His Holiness, Curate of Fithiviers Loiret, the night of Christmas in all countries 1912, we already published. In 1905 and 1906, 2 brochures on popular Christmas customs in all countries. Christmas in foreign lands and nativity creatures. La Nuit de Noël au Dance das le Space Chabot, Alphonse produced by Suzanne Schell, Reynold Levesque, and the online distributed proofreading team. This file was produced from images generously made, available at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, Mef Gallica. Price, 1 franc, free price, available the author, 18 Mail Ouest, Pithiviers. This 3rd publication, Christmas Eve, will, we hope, be even better received than its 2 sisters. It will be sufficient to read the titles of the chapters it contains to realize the interest it can offer. I. Christmas Eve and the legends associated with it. I. The Christmas log. I. The particularities of midnight mass. Iv. The Christmas Eve feast and Christmas cakes. V. Christmas gifts, the Christmas tree, and the Christmas stocking. We only provide in this small book a very concise summary of the numerous documents we have collected over many years. Normandy, which we have visited so many times from Rouen to Caen and from Mont Saint. Mitchell Saint-Just, La Hogue, is dear to us for many reasons. As we have already announced, we intend to publish later 2 other brochures titled The Feast of Kings in All Countries and Christmas in History or Christmas Ephemeris. 4 provinces have particularly supplied us with numerous, varied, and very interesting documents for this new brochure: Normandy, Berry, Provence, and Brittany. For 25 years, in our parish of Pithiviers, we have known and appreciated the zeal and devotion of 2 of its communities, whose memory is still very much alive among us, the religious of the Sacred Heart of Coutances, and the religious of the Christian schools of Mercy of Saint Sauveur le Vicomte. May our little book carry to them, in their solitude and distance, the tribute of our profound gratitude and unwavering attachment. M. Georges de Bosque, the indefatigable researcher and writer, distinguished from the Journal de Rouen, which has exhausted, so to speak, everything that can be said about Norman customs, has been one of our most reliable and enlightened guides. Lisnel de La Salle, in his scholarly work Beliefs and Legends, has not forgotten anything that was said or happened in his time in the Loire Indre and Cher countrysides. The Berry, our homeland, has left in our childhood memories all those old and knave legends told at winter gatherings from Villamerlin to Chedgertillen, Sir Loyer, and from Aubigny to Saint Florent Lee June. We have made use of him as a fellow countryman, almost word for word, fearing to alter the charm and local colour he knows so well to impart to his stories. Provence is rich in memories of all kinds. His museum in Arles, where one admires in the Knoll Room the 2 so lively, so picturesque scenes of the Grand Supper and the Christmas log, is a true wonder. What graceful poses among all these characters, what riches in all these Arlesian costumes! The eminent Provence or poet Frey Rick Mistral, despite his 80s, kindly agreed to correspond with us and gave us, by hand, the most intimate details of family life in Provence during Christmas time. We have often consulted Miets de Provence by Stephen Darve, La Revue de Provence, and Le Clocher Provençal, which contain charming pages on southern customs. So many legends are born in the lively yet melancholic imagination of the Britons, so attached to their religion and homes. Brittany has always had an indescribable charm for us, with its narrow valleys, its wild appearance, its ruined castles, its old abbeys, its thatched cottages, its holly forests as grand as oaks, its heather covered with druid stones around which sea-birds fly, its moors, its beaches, a sea that turns white against 1,000 skerries for a lonely, sad, stormy, cloudy region where the sound of winds and waves is eternal. Everyone knows the works of Emile Sylvester, Paul Fay-Val, and Brisax. These writers often evoke Breton memories that have provided us with valuable documents on Christmas customs in the land of dolmens and menhers. Among the many friends that our research on Christmas customs has made There are several we would like to mention here, but we fear offending their modesty. Some wrote to us with as much urgency as grace and talent. Those should be especially cordially thanked. In the course of this little work, we have permitted ourselves to quote some initials. Gratitude imposed that duty upon us. Nevertheless, we have maintained the utmost discretion. To show how popular the Christmas celebration is all over the world, to make known and love the divine child of Bethlehem, such are the two sentiments which inspired this lengthy work, which we hope, with God's grace and our friends' help, to bring to a successful conclusion. This brochure and the two previous ones, Christmas in Foreign Lands, and Nativity Scenes from Around the World, are sold to benefit the 3 free schools and parish works of Pithiviers. We ask our readers to spread the word among their friends. The Night of Christmas in All Countries, Chapter 1, Christmas Eve, and the legends told on that night. What sweet hours those of December eves, and what a charm they have left in our childhood memories. So at home joyful fires burn, while the wind shakes the house and rain beats against the windows. You can almost see, can't you, the well-closed room with its lamp under a shade, the fire of bracken crackling with a sharp noise, illuminating the ceiling with its beams. Sitting by the fire, the grandfather warms himself thoughtfully, while the pot bubbles and a thin stream of steam escapes from each side of its heavy lid. Baby, happy and busy, trots around the room. He touches the bellows, turns over the shovel, and looks with wonder and envy at his father stoking the fire, as the blue-tinged, long and slender flames lick the black and lustrous tile of the old fireplace. The housekeeper has laid aside her beautiful coif and put on her evening bonnet, standing. Her left hand on her hip, she twists and turns her large wooden spoon in the stew that simmers on the stove. In a corner of the room, Grandma explains to her granddaughter the illuminations from an old almanac already darkened by the years. The old clock, with its wide copper pendulum, strikes heavily its chords. Such are winter evenings in most rural areas. The Christmas Eve holds a particular character, especially in the south of France. It includes the lean meal called in Provence the Big Supper, entertainment, legends. Aye, the lean meal. Fear exist in our Arvan customs that, though less shining, do not lack a peculiar charm and a deeply Christian meaning. On Christmas Eve, as night falls, the table is set before the fireplace. It is covered with a very white cloth, and in the centre of a magnificent brioche. A copper chandelier meticulously polished is placed. The mistress of the house searches in the large armoire and returns with a candle carefully wrapped in embossed paper. The beautiful candle takes its place in the middle of the table. After preparations are complete, my old father, though sick, wants to attend the meal. He takes, with his shaking hand, the Christmas candle, lights it, makes the sign of the cross, then extinguishes it and passes it to the eldest brother. The latter, standing bareheaded, lights it in turn, signs himself, extinguishes it, then passes it to his wife. The candle thus passes from hand to hand so that each, according to their age rank, can light it. It finally arrives in the hands of the youngest. Helped by his mother, he lights it in turn, makes the sign of the cross, and, without extinguishing it, places it in the centre of the table where it shines, quite modestly, throughout the meal. Isn't this the touching memory of light that enlightens every man coming into this world one? Note none to John I 9. After this rite is completed, the meal begins joyfully, animatedly, seasoned by the fast of the vigil, enhanced by the appearance of the traditional cheese soup, and with surprises that the cook has prepared. She had to prepare the New Year's Eve feast. And when the grace notes are played, the children go to bed, lulled by the often, deceiving hope of attending the midnight mass. A large log is rolled into the hearth, and midnight is awaited, while singing old Christmas carols or telling stories from times past. When the hour arrives, when villagers arrive from all directions, with their lanterns and straw torches, we make our way to the church to experience the ever-new emotions of this blessed night too. Note 2 of. according to Clermont's week. We receive letters from Salce's Lozier. Sometimes the housewife, the mother of the family, has not been able to attend the midnight mass. It is she who still lights up with her last, raise the ephemeral royal figures of Epiphany Day. This meal often consists, in our mountains, of hot milk, fresh sausages, and other farm products, without excluding a glass of sparkling wine. The Christmas candle, carefully preserved, is lit on New Year's morning, when parents and friends come, before dawn, to offer their eager greetings. This graceful custom has been celebrated by one of our finest poets, the Christmas candles today, when acetylene, gas, or electricity have unceremoniously dethroned the ancient and smoky clarity of the candle. Can we really talk about her now? Yet she still lives and accomplishes fine feats when, from midnight to dawn, she radiates in many places. Come rather to Lozier. At the beginning of every reverie a single candle lights the family get-together. The grandmother, with a trembling hand, lights it, makes the sign of the cross, and dies at the same time. Comtesse O'Mahony in Provence, the whole family gathers around the table for the main meal, and extinguishes it. Then children, servants and maids do the same in a flash. Precisely preserved Lady Chandel, 8 days later, with its wick relit, still illuminates wishes and desires. And it is only on Epiphany, at this joyous feast of the kings, that the envious star shines. As early as 7 o'clock in the evening, the streets of the town or village are deserted, while all the houses are brightly lit for a day. The frugality of lighting is forgotten. The modest oil lamp Lou Cullen is set aside, and beautiful candlesticks, decorated with garlands, are placed symmetrically on the table. The place of honour belongs, by right, to the oldest, either grandfather or sometimes great-grandfather. Before sitting down to dinner, a large log from Christmas, cachofio, is lit in the fireplace, which must burn for half the night. The youngest child in the house, holding a glass of wine, makes 3 libations on the log, while the eldest speaks in Provence all the solemn words of the blessing. Allegra, God make us happy. Come, little fire, come welcome. God grant us the grace to see the coming year. If it is no more, let it not be less. Let's rejoice. May God give us joy. With Christmas all good things arrive. May God grant us the grace of seeing the year to come. And if next year we are no longer here, may we not be any lesser. As the log burns, we sit down for the abundant meal. The youngest child, with acute clumsiness, blesses the food, drawing a large cross above the table with his small, gently guided hands. It seems quite natural to choose this innocent little one as the representative of the new, born Christ. Note 3 Nicolay hissed. Dies croyances, TIP, 78. This meal, being a day of abstinence, consists only of lean dishes, but they are served in abundance: fresh fish, salted fish, vegetables, dried figs, almonds, walnuts, pears, oranges, chestnuts, and local pastries. It is therefore appropriate to call this feast the Great Supper. The children, who have been allowed this evening to keep company with their elderly parents, gaze at all these delicacies with amazed eyes. In some families, straw is placed under the table in memory of the manger where the Saviour was born. Sometimes, out of charity, servants are permitted to share the Master's table on this day. The Great Supper sometimes begins sadly, which is understandable. The guests count themselves, and cruel death often leaves someone missing from the call. For a moment they speak of the absent ones, pay a moved tribute to their memory, and recall their virtues. But the grandeur of the feast, the joy of the children, soon put an end to these sad memories. Conversations become louder, wine flows, nougat is devoured, and when hunger is satisfied, eyes turn towards the croci, representing the great mystery of the day. It's in front of the croci that after the main meal the family feast continues. Old Provençal carols are sung with enthusiasm, often several times, those by Saberly and Domergue being the most popular. The family evening prolongs itself through the night. Then everyone goes to church to attend the midnight Mass 4. Not 4, according to Fred. Charpin and France's Mazie. For the Provençals, The most traditional regional feast is Christmas. During this vigil, whose practice has been maintained with the same familial spirit for hundreds of years, people unite more closely with their beloved dead. Many enmities come to an end at this feast that one dares not miss, establishing a deep and Christian intimacy among all the parents. To remain alone at home apart on that day would be seen as a sign of bad nature and a heart lacking in Christianity. In the Comtat venison, the custom of the Christmas collation is of great simplicity. Fish or snails, depending on the resources of the guests, celery preserves, fruits of all kinds, green or dried. In the centre of the table, a bread or cake of elevated and conical shape known as pan calendor or Christmas bread. It must not be started before January 1st. Above this bread, a sprig of holly or green buassy, garnished with its red fruits and ganses made from reed marrow. The candles that light the meal must be new, and their use, along with that of the Christmas log, should continue until New Year's Day. We could not do better than to let Friedrich Mistral himself tell us la veli di Nol in Provence, true to the old customs. For my father, the great feast was the Christmas Eve. That day the farmers left early. My mother gave each one of them, in a napkin, a beautiful galette with oil, a log of nugget, a portion of dried figs, a cheese from the flock, a celery salad, and a bottle of cooked wine. We come, cousins, to put the log on the fire with you others. Together we would joyfully go looking for the Christmas log, which it was tradition had to be a fruit tree, and here and there the servants went off to put the log on the fire in their country and home. At the Mass, only the few poor men who had no family remained, and sometimes parents, some old boys, for example, would arrive at night, saying, "Happy holidays." We carried it into the house, one after another, the oldest holding one end, I, the youngest. The other we made it go round the kitchen 3 times. Then, in front of the hearthstone, my father solemnly poured a glass of cooked wine onto the log, saying, "Joy! Joy, my dear children, may God fill us with joy. With Christmas comes all good. May God grant us the grace to see next year, and if not more numerous, may we not be any less." And crying out all together, joy, "Joy!" in place of the candles, suspended to a reed, which throughout the year illuminated us with its small light. That day on the table 3 candles shone, and if sometimes the wick turned towards someone, it was an ill omen. Joy, we placed the tree on the sleds, and as soon as the first flame leapt up to the log, "Boat few," said my father, crossing himself, and then we all sat down to table. Oh, the holy table, truly holy, with a complete, peaceful, and happy family around it. At each end, in a plate, young wheat greened, which had been sown in water on St. Barbara's day. Note 5 muge, a sea fish also known as mulet. In the vigil, waiting for midnight mass, that day was long, and for a long time around the fire they spoke of the ancient ancestors and praised their deeds. Once, following the custom of the ancient Provençal lords, the table remained covered with food for 3 days of celebration. They only lifted the napkin when the meal was finished. Note 6 Gras Friedrich Mistral. In Marseille, for the meagre Christmas Eve meal, there must invariably be a dish of eels, a ratou, a sort of fish sauce, and vegetables. The dessert consists of dried fruits, cakes, jams, in short, everything that is known as calinos in Marseille. On the triple white cloth, one after another appeared the sacred emblems, the snails, which each extracted with a long nail from their shells, the fried cod, and the muge 5 with olives, the chard, the scorsinian, the celery with pepper, followed by a pile of treats reserved for that day, such as oil fritters, dried grapes, almond nugget, paradise apples. Above all, the great calendar bread, which was never cut until after giving a quarter to the first poor person who passed. To complete what we have already said about Christmas Eve in Provence, we will quote the description given by Jane de Flandrecy of the Gros Super Grand Supper in the Museum Arleton. In the first hall, called the Noel Sallow Calendular Hall, is represented the cuisine of a Mass farm, homestead. The Arles Museum, founded in 1896 by Friedrich Mistral, is a true reconstruction of the intimate, familial past of Provence. The illustrious founder gathered in 6 large halls open to the public everything related to the local and regional customs of the country. We see, surrounding the great fireplace, all the furniture, utensils, table credence, panetterie, hooch, cupboards, dresses for tinware, clock, chafing dishes, tableware, glass blowers, lamps, kitchen battery, copper brocks, rough pottery, etc. In short, all the traditional furniture of an old Provence or agricultural home. On the table, 3 napkins, 3 candles symbolize the mystery of the Holy Trinity. Upon seeing this room, we feel perfectly at home with rich peasants. The stables must be full, the mulberry trees must bear armfuls of leaves for the awakening of silk worms, and the vine must bleed at harvest time, as a wounded bull bleeds in an arena. We still see the sauve question, a large bottle containing grape grains in brandy, and finally the barrelet, a small barrel containing cooked wine, that famous cooked wine which the Provence alls drink a sip of at their feasts. At both ends, this table is garnished with the first fruits of the harvest in the form of young wheat, and covered with all the conventional dishes. The calendar bread Christmas, bread bearing a crucial incision a quarter, is reserved for the first poor person who passes. The muge lacking muge, we eat cod, snail's artichoke, celery, and finally la fugasso force, a flatbread perforated with holes. We will conclude with a very interesting letter that we received from a brother in Brittany 7. Note Seventra, a G, former curate of Malestroit. In many families, as you know as much as I do, the Christmas Eve celebration no longer holds any meaning. Many people who do not attend Mass and boast of not believing in anything still believe in the Christmas Eve festivities because it provides an excuse for a feast, but they give no thought to the birth of the child Jesus. Well, is it right for Christians to indulge in a feast at a time when the Gospel shows Mary and Joseph searching in vain for shelter and perhaps a piece of bread? I believe that, proportionately, one could almost say the same thing about the lean meal. Certainly the Auvergnats and Proven, alls you mention, are still believers, as they have preserved the tradition of the lean meal on Christmas Eve. However, this meal is too hearty and varied to be considered a form of mortification. Obviously, all these details are full of interest, and you were quite right not to overlook them, especially from a local picturesque perspective. But, I repeat, these major meals are true feasts, and not mere snacks for the watchful, and on Christmas Eve I find them quite out of place. After midnight Mass, we can rejoice, celebrate, nothing better, because then the shepherds have already brought provisions to the manger, and the Holy Family has no fear of famine. But before midnight, I must confess that it offends me all the more since I don't see, in the evening, any religious act preparing for the Christmas feast. In Britain nothing could be more frugal than the Christmas vigil meal. In Bignan, for example, they bake a small round loaf in the farm's oven for each family member. This little bread is eaten dry, without butter or any other drink but a glass of water. This is the entire vigil meal. We do not begin to eat until after sunset, and when we have been able to count at least 9 stars, in memory of the 9 months that the Virgin Mary carried the child Jesus. Once this major meal is over, we sit around the traditional log, and the vigil passes in prayer. In Mohon, where I was rector 3 years, before leaving for midnight Mass, they insist on reciting 1,000 Hail Marys. Each person says a chaplet in turn, while others respond. After 3 or 4 such chaplets have been recited, we take a break to sing some old Christmas carols, then return to prayer until the 20 chaplets needed to reach 1,000 Hail Marys are completed. We will quote some entertainments that take place on Christmas Day. We have found, in a notice about Beaufort, a very ancient custom that is no longer traceable in the country's traditions. Shortly after, on returning from midnight Mass, nature will take its course, and we will indulge in abundant revelry to celebrate the birth of Jesus, and also to recover from the fatigue of walking and keeping vigil. But then the Holy Family will have received the visit of the shepherds, and will no longer be in want. We agree entirely with our dear correspondent. The true Christian spirit of Christmas eve should consist in the mortification of the meagre vigil meal and after midnight mass, in the exuberant joy of the comforting revelry at which the entire family takes part. Aye. The entertainments. Here is the translation of the provided text. Behold what Christmas vigil should be, with variations, according to regions, in every truly Christian family. Take only the food necessary to sustain the body. Then, after the meal, pray in union with the angel, greeting 1,000 times the Virgin, who in a few moments will be the Mother of God, but who, for now, wanders still through the streets of Bethlehem, seeking shelter which will be refused. At the appointed hour they would proceed, escorted by the entire crowd, to a bridge over a small river at the end of town. In Beaufort, it was customary for all married couples who had tied the knot that year to gather on the eve of Christmas to present a grand entertainment to the public. There, at the signal given by the city's first magistrates, and in the presence of the lord of the place, who presided over the ceremony, they rushed into the water to grab, swimming, a ball that had been thrown into the current. The swimmers had the freedom to tear the ball from the hands of those who had grabbed it first. It was, one can imagine, a very long and very exciting struggle. Whoever, the strongest or the most agile, managed to master the ball was proclaimed the winner. A similar custom took place in Normandy at Mesnil, Sus, Jumy, Jess, and Yeville. He received 50 livres for setting up his household, and was escorted home to the sound of the trumpet, drums, pipes, and oboes. Those of the young men who, not being ill, did not want to shiver while swimming after the ball, paid a fine to the winner's benefit. The last bride of the year-end, it was who would marry last to have this honour, in the presence of the whole parish assembled, threw over the church a ball, or yarn, in which was enclosed a sum of money. Every one made efforts to grab it. To keep it, one had to go home and kiss the yarn to the Christmas log in the fireplace. Whoever touched the carrier cried out, "Let go of the yarn," and the yarn was thrown again. Often this part of the thrown ball lasted for a long time, and sometimes the lucky possessor of the ball remained away from the village for 2 or 3 days before returning home, waiting for his opponents, tired, to give up the fight. A sort of superstition mixed in, the yarn bringing good luck to the hamlet that possessed it. It was a talisman that assured good crops to whoever could keep it. All of this was very harmless, but the crowds, the ensuing scuffles, were less so, and in 1866 this original Norman custom 8 was definitively abolished. Note 8 Journal de Rouen, Support 25/898. Here, according to Mr. J. Calendar 9, is what took place on the eve of Christmas in the Champagne villages. Note 9 Librarian of the city of Chaumont. The celebrations of Christmas begin as evening falls. As soon as the last light of day merges into darkness, all the inhabitants of the region take great care to extinguish their homes. Then they go in crowds to light torches at the church lamp. Once these torches have been blessed by the clergy, they carry them through the fields. This is what is called the Flambats festival. During the vigil, peasants gather on the square and in the courtyards, indulging in countless pleasant pastimes and entertaining themselves with madcap ventures. These flambats are the only fire burning in the village. This blessed and rejuvenated fire will cast young sparks onto the revived hearth in a few moments, a symbolic image of the spiritual rebirth brought to the world by Jesus Christ. Then the Christmas log is lit. Some feign trying to bite the moon, others attempting to break an eel with their knees, still others striving to silence the 4 winds, and some finally trying to quiet the women who soak the cloth doing laundry. But all games cease at midnight as the bells ring out in the darkened air. From all sides, long files of parishioners arrive at the church, carrying pitch-soaked torches that cast bright lights over the dazzling countryside and cause frost on the bushes by the fences. We have received from one of our dear brothers the most charming account one could desire of a Christmas Eve in Le Rouergue 10. Note Tentre, Mr. Ab M., from the Diocese of Rodez. Fear, in the vast arid plains of the Kos, as on the mountains of Lely Vizu and the wooded hills of Eselgala. It is very cold at the end of December, so they do not economize wood in the large fireplace, round which the whole family gathers for the vigil. Old customs are increasingly lost in our Rouergue, as everywhere else. As progress seeps into our mountains, old traditions gradually disappear to make way for the monotonous banality of selfishness and comfort. However, this is what usually happens around Christmas in the mountainous and rugged regions surrounding Rodez. It is the old Rouergue, which managed to protect itself from Protestantism and English invasion. Politics has stealthily infiltrated itself even to us, and gone our patriarchal gatherings. So, gathered around a great fire, the family speaks softly. Suddenly, the bells ring out. In old times, the neighbours would also come. We would gather thus, numerous, sometimes at one house, sometimes at another, chatting merrily without constraint or embarrassment, nibbling on delicious roasted chestnuts, and washing them down with cider, or a little white wine harvested in our valleys. Alas, the carillons, one of the elders said, and thereupon, to satisfy the keen curiosity of the young, all the ancient legends of Christmas are recalled, which everyone already knows but still delights in. It is said that the bells of a destroyed ancient parish, thrown into some deep chasm by Protestants or revolutionaries, begin to ring on their own to answer the joyful carillons of their sisters, who sing so merrily from the village bell tower. Then come various stories about the birth of the Saviour. Almost always these stories end with a Christmas hymn, in dialect of courser, in the middle of the night. The shepherds leave their beds to go and adore the birth. My God, before leaving for midnight mass, we would place the Christmas log suco nodolenquo, a God full of power, come to be God. How many times haven't I heard the trembling voice of my dear old Mimi, over 80 years old, rocking me in her arms to the melancholic and supplicating tune of this knave song. In the great hall of the castle, masters and servants were gathered. The supper had just ended. Pages brought golden cakes and vermeil wine jugs to brighten the evening. According to tradition, the Christmas log in every respectable home must last until January 1st, and indeed, to ensure a happy and prosperous year, it must burn without going out until Epiphany, so that if the three kings were to pass by, they would have something to warm their tired and frozen limbs from the harsh bice of our mountains. That's why I've seen whole trees or immense oak logs carried by 3 or farm boys through the gigantic fireplace in the kitchen. A very skilled pen has staged the ancient Christmas vigil in Lorraine country. We are happy to reproduce this graceful scene. It was Christmas Eve in Lorraine country. At the head of the table, Count Raoul de Brymont presided over the meal in his carved signorial armchair bearing the insignia of his house. He cried, "Christmas!" joyously as he raised his silver cup, and his resonant voice awakened. Along with the echoes in the great hall, joy in all the courtiers, and all repeated, "Christmas!" For all the servants of Brymont present at the Christmas feast loved their young master, 15 years old, and respected his blond head, just as they once honoured the white hair of his ancestor. Therefore cry Christmas, but also long live our gentle Dauphin Charles XI. Note Helene Marie de Leicester and D'Orléans, 7 Jan. 1905. To the right of Count Raoul Ara, the chaplain, Sir Didier, who will celebrate midnight mass in the chapel just now. Then Elaine, the old squire of the late lord, Dame Pennette, who nourished and raised the child, the servants, the armed men of the small garrison defending the castle during these troubled days, the varlets, pages, and finally a family of poor farmers who came on that very day to seek shelter behind the walls of Bremont from the fury of the pillaging bands ravaging the countryside. In Paris, like in all great capitals, movement and animation redouble on the eve of Christmas, and continue not only well into the evening, but also part of the night. Long live our young lord. Thank you, my good servants and friends, continues Count Rao. Thank you for your affection and the care with which you have surrounded me throughout this year, the last that I spend among you and under the roof of my fathers. Soon the departure time will strike. Soon, under the guidance of my lord, I will go to find our Lord King Charles. Soon I shall be a knight, able to chase the Englishman and help, if God pleases, to drive him out of the kingdom of France. Christmas, one of our greatest religious festivals, one of the most moving family celebrations, is at the same time the most frankly joyful of popular festivities. As soon as night falls, the streets are overrun by a crowd on the boulevards, where small temporary shops give off the air of a children's party. There is a constantly growing and renewed tide of walkers. The café terraces quickly become crowded. To all these people sitting at tables, hawkers come to offer the toy of the day, accompanied by their most original patter. Beggars try to exploit the pity of passers-by, and penniless industrialists improvise artists for the occasion. These kinds of minstrels have been multiplying for a few years. Some exercise their talent without collaboration, but most are grouped in duos or trios to give their concert. They go through their repertoire, usually insignificant, in front of an unassuming audience, as they are listened to rather distractionally. These virtuosos of the cobblestone, poor, cricket of art, for whom electric light serves as a substitute for the sun, often accompany their songs with dances that do not always ensure them what is needed to survive. A most edifying and touching practice still exists in the village of Montsécret-Orne. On the eve and morning of Christmas Day, a pious and well-respected young girl goes from house to house, carrying the child Jesus in the nativity scene, and has him kissed by the little children. The parents then offer a donation for the maintenance of the lamp that burns in the church before the nativity scene throughout the month of January. This visit is considered an honor and a blessing by the families. The children eagerly await it and welcome it with joy. Note Toiventry, according to Abbé V, from the Diocese of Cérès. Legend is what makes the Christmas Eve charm most is undoubtedly the legends told there. Together they form one of the most captivating chapters in popular literature. They are terrifying or moving, dramatic or graceful in turn. It would be quite difficult to say what the origin of these fables, tales or stories which concern the birth of the child Jesus are. These narratives, to which old people know how to give so much charm, still delight children. Christmas Eve legends can diversify according to the characters that appear. Inanimate beings, animals, demons, edifying tales. This is the order we will follow. Inanimate beings in Franche-Comté. It is said that a pyramid-shaped rock, which dominates the crest of a mountain, turns 3 times on itself during midnight mass, when the priest reads the genealogy of the Saviour. On this same night, the sands of the beaches, the rocks of the hills, the depths of the valleys open up, and all the treasures buried in the earth's core appear in the light of the stars. In this same region there is a legend of the spinning stone. It is a pointed stone standing balanced on a rock between the villages of Say in Varese and Clare, and it supposedly makes a complete turn on itself at midnight on Christmas 13. Now, V, from the Diocese of Besançon. In the Vosges Mountains, the turning stone, a tall block that existed near Remiremont, would move on its own when the bells of Remiremont, Saint neighboured. And Saint, it in 2 neighbouring parishes to Remiremont, called the faithful to midnight Mass 14. Note Hunfortree Richard, popular traditions. It is mainly in the Cock's country sign, inferior, that the legend of the spinning stones exists. These stones once made 3 tours of themselves during midnight mass, and the monsters that were supposed to inhabit them performed mad dances around them, that it would have been dangerous to disturb. Let us mention Gargantua's chair in Duclair, the Ganter stone Tincarville, the Devil's stone in Crichtot, Sir Auville. Some claim to have heard the ancient bell of the monastery church of Auville-l'Abbé, which is said to be buried in the Bos, Ox, Moins, in Baudeville. In Millia-Res, in the Cotentin Manche, at the junction of the Murriettes, there is a block of stone weighing 1,000 kilograms that, they say, jumps 3 times on Christmas Day at midnight. They still believe in the country of cocks that lost bells ring during midnight mass. But above all, one should read Breton legends. Numerous as well as enormous are the stones that move during midnight mass to go drink like drunk sheep to rivers and streams. A megalith near Jugan-Sicutes, du Nord, leads to the river of the Arguinen. One must especially hear, as told to us by Emal Sovster, the pretty legend of the stones of Ploenec going to drink until River 15. Note 15 mile Sovista, Lifoya Breton, Volume I, p. In the Cuordes Wood, a granite block, 3 meters high, descends to drink at the nearby stream and returns to its place by itself. On top of Mount Beliox, there is a menor that is lifted by a merle, revealing a treasure, 181. The most famous was once the large stone of Saint Myril, which Gargantua used to sharpen his scythe, and which he stuck into the ground after harvesting, as it is still found today. It hid a treasure that tempted a peasant from the area. That peasant was so greedy that there was no one like him. He took the poor man's farthing and the rich man's gold piece. He would have paid with the flesh of debtors if necessary. When he learned that on Christmas Eve the rocks would be refreshed by the streams, revealing buried riches hidden by the ancients, he thought about seizing them all day long. To obtain the treasure, he had to pick the golden branch that shone only at midnight in the mulberry woods, and equalled the power of the wand of the greatest fairies. Then, having picked the branch, he rushed with all his strength towards the plateau, where Gargantua's rock displayed its dark mass. And when midnight struck, he wide opened his eyes. Heavily, the block of stone began to move, rising above the earth, bounding across the desolate moorland like a drunk man, with sudden jolts that echoed through the valley's terrain. Until this moment, the magical branch illuminated the place from which the stone had just departed. A vast pit opened up, filled with golden coins. It was dazzling for the greedy man, who leapt into the middle of the treasure, and set about filling the sack he had brought. Once the sack was well loaded, he piled his gold coins into his pockets, into his clothes, even into his shirt. In his fervour, he forgot about the stone that was going to take back its place. Already the bells were not ringing any more. Suddenly, the silence of the night was broken by the jerking blows of the rock climbing up the hill and striking the earth with greater force, as if it had become heavier after drinking from the river. The greedy man continued to gather his golden coins. He did not hear the noise that the stone made when it leaped with a bound into its hole, straight as if it had never left. The poor man was crushed under this enormous mass, and from his blood he watered the treasure of St. Myril 16. Note 66 for lectures for all, Dec. 1903, p. 190. Animals there exists, especially in France, a popular belief whose forms vary depending on different regions. It is the conversation between animals during midnight mass, and particularly during the reading or singing of the genealogy. The master, furious at hearing this prediction, grabbed a fork to strike the ill-omened prophet, but in his haste he accidentally hurt himself on the head, and the next day the oxen carried him to the ground. This is the theme developed differently according to the provinces. In the Vosges, in Bresse, canton of Saulxes, Sir Moselot, one takes care to feed the animals abundantly before going to midnight mass. At Cornemont, in the Val de Jol, they still believe that the animals get up and talk together during midnight mass. This is perhaps a remnant of the representation of the ancient Mystia Ridula Nativity, during which animals were made to speak. This widespread belief, with many variations, can be summarized as follows to a peasant, likely drunk, having overlooked offering his livestock the traditional midnight feast, hears this dialogue between the 2 bulls in his stable. First bull: "What shall we do tomorrow?" Comrade: "Second ox: We will carry our master to the ground." A story is told about this, that a resident of Cornament, known for his strong spirit, wanted to confirm this supernatural fact. He went to sleep in a dark corner of the stable behind his house. At midnight he saw one of his oxen wake up and then stand heavily, yawning, and ask its wary companion what they would do the next day. The latter replied that they would lead their master to the cemetery. Driven by curiosity, she visited her stables during midnight mass. She learned from her oxen that they would not delay in leading her to her grave. Note in Seventry Popular Traditions by Richard. This event did not fail to occur. According to tradition, our strong mind was seized with such fear that it died suddenly on the spot. Thus, perhaps, the oxen recounted, it is also said that a similar adventure befall a woman from Rouen, ox boys, in the canton of Remiremont. Remiremont, 1848. The night of Christmas is famous for an old legend that the Dutch farmers tell with terror during winter vigils. They claim that on Christmas Day, around midnight, the donkey and the ox start talking to each other. They discuss the time when Jesus' child had only their breath to warm him. This miraculous gift of speech is the present sent every year from heaven to these two animals in memory of the good services rendered to the child of Jesus in the stable in Bethlehem. But woe betide anyone who tries to overhear their mysterious conversation. His temerity is punished in a terrible way. He falls dead at that very moment 18. Note Atri li Petit Landes, December 25, 1902. A good peasant from Gale Res learned this to his cost. To convince himself of the truth of the matter, he came to listen at the stable, and there, just at midnight, the ox says to his neighbour, Hobart. Hobarton. What are we doing, my friend? Let's put up the fence or the hedge. The donkey is dying of cold. Note 9 to 9 Saucy Resit Loops, Garrus Les Landes, p. 39. Here is the auto to English translation of the text provided. This is how Leju Lazal gracefully embroidered this legend. The scene takes place in Beritu Tunti. Note Twintry Beliefs and Legends Vol. I, p. 17. It is said that at the moment when the priest raises the host during midnight mass, all the cow's horned animals from the parish kneel and pray before the nativity scene. It is also said that after this mental prayer, if there are two brothers among the cows in a stable, they invariably start talking. They tell of a boy of 21 who, during this solemn moment, was lying next to his cows and heard the following dialogue. What shall we do tomorrow? Suddenly asked the youngest of the herd. Note 21. A boy is the young man who guides or encourages the cows during ploughing. He found himself seated at table with 3 or 4 drunken louts from his neighbourhood. Under the pretext of making the midnight mass, he presided over a monstrous orgy, while the score of gnaw, Christmas log, blazed in the hearth, and his wife and children were still at church. The farmer was struck by Francois's startled expression upon his arrival in the room. "Well, what is it?" he suddenly asked. "Only the oxen spoke," answered the perplexed lout. "And what did they sing?" inquired the master. "They sang that they would carry you to the grave tomorrow," he continued. "That's what the old black said, and he even sent me to warn you, so that you might prepare yourself for grace." "Old black lied, and I'll give him a correction," exclaimed the farmer, his face flushed with wine and anger. It is also known as boer in French, derived from the Italian boro. "We will take our master to the grave," responded a black, robed old ox, with a lugubrious voice, "and you wouldn't do amiss, Francois." Continued the honest animal as he fixed his large eyes on the watchman, who was not sleeping. "You would do well to go warn him, so that he may tend to matters concerning his salvation." The watchman, less surprised by his animals' speech than frightened by the meaning of their words, left the stable in a hurry and went to inform the farm manager. No one knew. In any case, his friends, who ran to help him, only managed to lift a corpse, and the prediction of old black came true, and leaping on to an iron pitchfork, he bounded out of the house, making for the stables. But barely had he reached the middle of the courtyard when he swayed, stretched out his arms, and fell headlong to the ground. Was it the effect of drink, anger, or fear? At midnight, they say, all farm animals kneel down, and anyone curious enough to enter the stable at that moment solely to verify the fact would be immediately punished for their audacity. Note 22. These details were provided by a resident of Mili Resmanchi. Demons and superstitious beliefs. An old Christmas gives us a striking and knave description of the demon's fury at the coming of the Messiah heir. I steer. The demon, surely, within his heart steers, for God comes presently to save the sons of Adam, and Eve. He reigned absolutely without giving us a truce, but this holy event saves the sons of Adam and Eve. Since this ancient adventure, cattle have continued to speak once a year at midnight on Christmas Day, but no one has sought to uncover the secret of their conversation. In Romorantin, one of our correspondents writes, "When I was a child, I was advised to be present at the Croci on Christmas Eve at midnight. They told me it was the time when the ox and the ass borrowed human voices to greet the born Christ." In Cotentin, where faith is naive, people believe that all creation adores the little Jesus at Christmas. Let us sing Christmas loudly, leave our dreams behind, bless the salvation of all the children of Adam and Eve, Eve3. Note 2D Christmas Bible, p. 33. The night of Christmas is the most mysterious of all nights. It seems that Satan, exasperated by the failure this divine anniversary reminds him of, feels at each return of the great feast to redouble his hatred and fury against humanity. It is then that he scatters along the paths, and on the crossroads, where the pious caravans of midnight mass must pass, these wide and splendid pistols that cast into the shadows such magical and captivating reflections. It is then that he opens, at the foot of crosses and rural oratories, these gaping caverns in which one sees streams of gold flowing. Woe to him who attempts to fill his pouch with this brilliant currency. Every pistol picked up immediately slips from his hands, leaving on his fingers a black, indelible imprint, accompanied by an intense burning sensation, like the fire of hell. Note 24.3. The term carroirs refers to all rural crossroads, meaning any open space or desert where several paths intersect. The Marfate Malevolent One, devil is everywhere, encountered in the countryside in the most unexpected forms. Once upon a time, at the St. Amand College, an old servant recounted the fantastic adventure that had befallen him on December 25, 1783. Despite his father's warnings, he had set traps in an old cemetery. Finally, after a long chase, they both reached the banks of the Cher River, just as the hunter was about to grasp his prey. The cunning creature leaped across the river in one bound. He ran there during midnight mass and found a rabbit caught in his trap, biting off its own paw instead of waiting for him. Pursuing it, the rabbit managed to escape as quickly as its injury allowed. Note 27 Rooster. And indeed, there comes a moment when evil is finally reduced to impotency. It is when the first stroke of midnight rings. Listen rather to what June Scorn from St. Michel. Engravi near Plomilio coats do. Nord reads one day, while wandering along the shores of St. Michel, he encountered a poor traveller who, in gratitude for a piece of bread he had given him, revealed the way to gain fortune and happiness. Turning to the terrified young man, well then, shouted the devil, now back in his human form, "Is this how a lame person jumps?" In Limousin in the countryside there is a belief that on Christmas night evil spells, sorceries, and all works of evil spirit lose their power. It becomes possible to penetrate even the most hidden treasures, as the vigilance of the monsters or supernatural beings who guard them fails, or their power is suspended. Note 25th Miftra. He learned from her that in the middle of the strike stood a castle inhabited by a princess, beautiful as a fairy and rich as the 12 princes of France. The spirits of hell held her under the waters. At Christmas, at the first stroke of midnight, the sea parted, and revealed the castle. Whoever could enter, and go take in the hall in the depths a magical wand, he could become the husband of the Chiutelane. But one had to have laid hands on the wand before the last stroke of midnight. Otherwise, the sea would return to swallow the castle, and the daring seeker was metamorphosed into a statue. Scarn resolved to attempt the adventure. G. from the Archaeological Society of Limousin. Shakespeare, the great English poet, was aware of this tradition when, in Hamlet, he has Marcellus say, "Some say that evagainst that season comes, wherein our Saviour's birth is celebrated. The bird of dawning singeth a night long, and then, they say, no spirit dare stir abroad. The nights are wholesome, then no planets strike, no fairy takes, nor witch hath power to charm. So hallowed and so graceful is the time." Note 26, Shakespeare, Hamlet, Act I, Scene I. There are those who say that always, at the time when the birth of our Saviour is celebrated, the dawn bird at 27 sings throughout the night, so it is said that no spirit dares to wander in space. The nights are without malice, no planet can harm. No fairy takes, and no witch has the power to cast spells. How blessed and full of grace this time of year is! At midnight, indeed, the sea parted like a curtain drawn, and revealed a castle resplendent with lights. Scarn made one leap towards the entrance and crossed the threshold. The first hall was filled with precious furniture, gold and silver chests. All around stood the statues of adventurers who had been unable to go any further. A second room was guarded by lions, dragons, and monsters with gnashing teeth. John Scarn was lost if he hesitated. As the 6th stroke of midnight rang out, he succeeded in passing through the enchanted beasts that parted and entered a more splendid apartment than all the others, where the sea nymphs stood. He was about to be drawn into their dance, when he saw deep in the distance the magical staff. He leaped and seized it triumphantly. The 12th stroke of midnight sounded. But Scarn held the magical staff, and had nothing more to fear. At his command, the roaring sea retreated from the castle, and the spirits of hell, definitively defeated, fled in cries that made the rocks tremble. The princess, freed, offered her hand to the brave saviour. These were splendid weddings, and Jean Scarn, in his gratitude for the saints who had protected him, used half of his treasures to build a chapel to St. Michael, the Archangel 28. Note 28, Lectures Portus, Dec, 1903, p. 109-3. There are many superstitious beliefs associated with Christmas. In the Byzantine villages, people observe which way the wind blows after midnight mass. It is believed this will indicate the dominant wind for the coming year. In the Vosges countryside, the 12 days between Christmas and Epiphany predict the weather for each of the year's 12 months 29. These days are known as les jours des lots in the region. Note 29 in Vaucluse. The 12 days preceding Christmas are called jours compteurs. Near G and Lorette, they refer to the time between Christmas and New Year as jours faves effervides. They indicate, generally, the dominant temperature of the first 6 months of the following year. But in reverse order, December 31st corresponds to January and December 26th to June. The first onion, starting from the left, corresponds to the month of January, and the others to the following months according to their order. On Epiphany, which is the last day of the 12 days, examine the onions. To know the weather, take the following arrangements. Place in a line 12 onions hollowed out in the form of nut shells, starting from December 25th, in the following order: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10, 11, 12, put a few grains of salt in each hollowed onion. Where the salt has not melted, the corresponding month must be dry. Where it is melted, the corresponding month must be wet. In Normandy, one predicts the fertility of apple trees according to whether the moon shines more or less on those who go to or return from midnight mass. In the country of cocks, they used to place a piece of blessed bread from midnight mass on a wooden bowl or any plate. They would let it drift along the rivers until the plate stopped, indicating where a drowned body was located. For a long time, the people of Cox along the Seine held this belief. They also believed that the blessed bread from midnight mass had the power to loosen the tongues of children. In some families in Cox, they keep it as a talisman with the virtue of indicating the health of the absent. In Corsica, young people have the habit of running from house to house in a way to make 7 vigils before midnight mass, so as to be considered worthy of learning old women's signs, some superstitious ones that allow them, if necessary, to render powerless and harmless the stings of scorpions and other harmful animals. These signs can only be properly communicated on Christmas night, and only to those who have completed the 7 vigils. Brittany can especially be called the classic land of legends. Ask the old farmers gathered at winter vigils. While the audience shivers with fear and presses around the hearth where a fire of prickly juniper shines, they will reveal to you the names of all the mysterious or sinister beings that populate the nights of the old Amoric. It is especially during Christmas night that the ordinary order of nature is disturbed. When the bell rings to announce the elevation of the midnight mass, all created beings on earth appear at once in the world. Let us lend our ears to the ancient tradition. It deserves it by its poetic strangeness. Here are the ghosts advancing. Near the fairies of the woods and waters, the Korrigans with their hammers and the dragons guardians of the treasures appear. Then the boy with the big head, scarecrow of rainy nights, the man-wolf, the conductor of the dead, and the deceptive horse. The chariot of Anko carries the bird of death and John of fire. The blue flames dancing in cemeteries, the drowned rising from the sea, the devil at the crossroads who comes to buy the black hen, the sorcerer searching for the gold grass, the damned lifting the stone from their tomb to ask for prayers, the night laundresses. It is the terrible procession that marches across the moorland, while snow whirls and faithful prostrate themselves before the altar. Note 30, Christmas. That's P's 78. Edifying tales. There are countless legends of this sort. We will only quote a few. It is said that at Marienstein, this beloved sanctuary of northern Switzerland and Alsace, a rose bloomed on Christmas night, closed all year round, from which escaped a delightful fragrance and a brilliant light. It was the Christmas rose or the snow rose, they say, as Albert de Mun relates in Our Brittany Moors. When the Magi arrived at the stable in Bethlehem, they found the shepherds who, having nothing else to offer the divine child, garlanded with field flowers the manger where he lay. The Magi displayed their rich gifts. Seeing this, the shepherds said among themselves, "Here we are well. Beside these beautiful things of gold and silver, what will become of our poor flowers? The child will not even look at them. But behold, the infant Jesus, gently pushing away with his foot the piled up treasures before him, stretched out his little hand towards the flowers, picked a daisy from the field, and, holding it to his lips, pressed a kiss upon it. It is since that time that the daisies, which had been all white until then, have at the end of their leaves a beautiful pink hue that seems like a reflection of dawn, and in their hearts the golden ray fallen from divine lips." Let us conclude with the Christmas of the dead. This was in the time of good King St. Louis, a blessed time when faith and piety reigned in the land of France. The midnight Mass of Christmas had just been celebrated in the Abbey Church of St. Vincent du Mans. The monks had all retired, and the abbot had returned to his cell. Overwhelmed by age, he had promptly lain down on his humble cot. A heavy sleep soon overpowered his being. Suddenly, a strange noise echoed through the cell door. The priest, startled awake, sat up half-rise. The noise renewed itself more violently, more fantastically. The monk rushed towards the door. He opened it. A terrifying sight presented itself to his eyes. An immense crowd of beings, clad in white shrouds, stood there in the long corridor, all held aloft a burning torch. A dread silence hung over this multitude. Seized with fear and fearing some diabolical deed, the priest made a large cross sign upon himself first, then upon all that crowd. These beings bowed then, repeating the same sacred sign. To do so, they parted their shrouds, and the priest saw they were skeletal, gaunt corpses. A grim gleam seemed attached to these dried bones, and the skeletons appeared greatly to suffer from these flames. The monk, reassured by the pious sign of the cross made by these ghosts, asks them, "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer. The two closest to him grasp him by his scapula and drag him along with them. A procession forms behind them. Everyone heads towards the church. Soon the altar is prepared. Some light the candles, while others arrange the sacred ornaments. The abbot realizes that these beings wish to assist at the divine sacrifice on the altar. He puts on the chasuble and begins the Holy Mass. A sublime chant of triumph and liberation is heard until the end of Mass. Groaning voices respond to the verses recited by the priest. The skeletons kneel piously in the choir in the nave. The church is filled with them. Silence is broken only by the voice of God's minister and the prayers of the assistants. At Freitas, when the abbot turns around, he sees that the skeletons have left their shrouds. The moment of consecration has arrived. At the voice of his priest, Jesus descends invisibly onto the altar. Then the moans cease. A heavenly harmony fills the church. When the monk turns around at Et Missa Est, all the skeletons have disappeared, a glowing cloud rising towards heaven, the faint echo of mysterious canticles. That's all that remains of the sublime spectacle he has just witnessed. The abbot returns to his cell deeply moved, especially happy to have been, in this circumstance, the instrument of divine mercy. Since then, every year, at the Abbey of St. Vincent, it was customary to celebrate, after the solemn office of Christmas Eve, a low Mass for the distressed ones in purgatory. Note 31 mm. Louis Chambers, Semaine du Mans Deck, 25, 1903. Let us listen to Dom Guy Ranger describe the Christmas vigil and give us its true Christian meaning. Here we saw, and no memory of our childhood is dear to us, an entire family, after a frugal and severe evening meal, gathering around a vast hearth, waiting only for the signal to rise as one man and go to the midnight Mass. Voices and hearts were in harmony as they executed these rural melodies composed in better days. The foods that were to be served upon their return, whose simple but succulent pursuit was to add to the joy of such a holy night, were prepared in advance, and at the centre of the hearth a robust tree trunk, decorated with the name Christmas log, burned brightly and gave off powerful heat throughout the room. Its purpose was to burn slowly during the long hours of the service, so as to offer upon their return a salutary bonfire to warm the limbs of the elderly and children chilled by the coldness. However, one spoke with great joy about the mystery of the great night. One pitied Mary and her tender child, exposed in a forsaken stable, subject to all the rigours of winter. Then soon someone would sing one of these beautiful nulls, to which one had already spent so moving vigils throughout Advent. It used to be that from one Christmas to the next all worries of life were suspended, all pain was soothed, and every soul was uplifted. But suddenly the sound of bells, resonating through the night, would put an end to these noisy yet lovely concerts. These nave hymns retold the visit of Angel Gabriel to Mary, and the announcement of a divine maternality made to the noble Virgin, the fatigue of Mary and Joseph walking through the streets of Bethlehem. As they frantically searched for lodging in the inns of this ungrateful city, the miraculous birth of the Queen of Heaven, the charm of the newborn in his humble cradle, the arrival of the shepherds with their rustic gifts, their somewhat rough music, and the simple faith of their hearts. People would then set out towards the church. Happy were the children whose slightly less tender age allowed them to participate in these ineffable joys for the first time on this solemn night, whose strong and holy impressions would last a lifetime. Note 32, indeed, these are the themes addressed in our old Christmas celebrations, whose poetry is so nave and pious. Note 33, Dom Guéranger, The Time of Christmas, Volume I, p. 161. May we revive these dear and touching habits that blended the holy emotions of religion with the most intimate joys of family. Chapter I. The Christmas Log once brought all the household together, all the guests under the family hearth, parents and servants, around the familiar fire. The blessing of the log with its traditional ceremonies was nothing more than the blessing of the fire, at a time when the rigour of the season made it more useful than ever. This custom prevailed especially in northern countries. It was the festival of fire, the Licht of the ancient Germans, the Yule log, the Druidic forest fire replaced by early Christians with this festival of Sainty. Loose note 34, whose name, inscribed on December 13th in the calendar, still evokes light. Note 34 for, of course, Lucy comes from Latin lux, lucis, light. It is only natural to honour on December 25th, in the heart of winter, the dry resinous piece of wood that promises warm radiations to members chilled by the cold. But often this custom was a natural tax paid to the lord by his vassal. At Christmas, wood was brought, at Easter, eggs or lambs, at Assumption, wheat, at All Saints' Day, wine or oil. Sometimes poor people couldn't afford suitable logs for Christmas Eve, and would beg for them. Many religious and peasants, writes Leopold Belisel, received for their Christmas fires a tree or a large log called trelefut. The trefuet, which is found under the same name in Normandy, Lorraine, Burgundy, Berry et Sierre, according to the commentary on Jean de Garlande's dictionary, is the large log that was meant to last during the 3 days of festivities. Hence its name trefu, from Latin tres foci, 3 fires. Everywhere, even in the humblest cottages, people gathered around large hearths, where a log from oak or beech blazed with its bumps and hollows, with its ivy and moss. The door stood wide open for poor travellers seeking shelter for the night. They were given wine, beer, or cider in generous amounts, depending on the region, and a place at the family table. Thus they waited for midnight mass. Imagine the vast chimneys of old beneath their roofs, and entire family, parents, children, servants, not to mention faithful dogs and timid cats, could find shelter. Here, according to Mr. J., a wise old grandmother would tell stories, only pausing to strike the log with her fire iron, causing sparks to fly, and saying, "Happy New Year, bountiful harvests, as many sheaves and little ones." The Christmas log was a very common custom in almost all the provinces of our old France. Cornandit 35 is the ceremony followed by most families. As soon as the last hour of the day had merged into the shadow of night, all Christians took great care to extinguish their hearths, then went in crowds to light torches at the lamp burning in the church, in honour of Jesus. A priest blessed the torches that were to be carried into the fields. These torches bore the only fire that reigned in the village. This log was always the largest that could be found. It was the thickest part of the tree trunk, or even the stump, called the coqui 3/6 of Christmas. While they prayed for baby Jesus to grant them wisdom, they would attach dried fruits, nuts, and candies to the end of the log. They would light it, and the little children would pray in a corner of the room, their faces turned towards the wall, so that the stump would bring them presents. They were told it was the blessed and regenerated fire that was to cast young sparks onto the revived hearth. Note 35th tree, librarian of the city of Chaumont. Meanwhile, the head of the household, accompanied by his children and servants, went to the place where, the previous year, they had reserved the remains of the log. They solemnly brought these logs. The patriarch placed them in the fireplace, and everyone knelt down, reciting the pater, while 2 strong farm hands or boys brought in the new log. As soon as the first toll of the bell, it was a duty to go to Mass, and we would go in long lines with torches in hand. Note 36th tree. The elongated cake shaped like a log given to children on Christmas Day still bears the name goodwill or petite bibuchi in dialect, cognu in some countries. At 11 o'clock all games and pleasures ceased. Before and after Mass, all the attendees sang Christmas carols, and then we returned home to warm ourselves by the fire and celebrate midnight Mass with a joyful feast. An old author, Marchetti, explains the religious significance of these practices. The Christmas log, he says, represents Jesus Christ, who compared himself to green wood. From that point on, our author continues, since iniquity is called wine, and the drink of the wicked in the 4th book of Proverbs, it seems that the wine poured by the head of the household onto this log signified the multitude of our iniquities, that the Eternal Father, spread upon his Son in the mystery of the Incarnation, to be consumed with him in charity, which he burned throughout the course of his mortal life. J. Note 38, Cos Codex log. No means Christmas this word was used by our fathers in this censer at New Year's Eve sing. For the day is festive. No, no, no. For the day is festive. Old Nobles. Bible. J. 37, note 37, Semaine Religius Dudaxidi Langus, December 23, 1905. We will tell you what the Christmas log offered in Berry, Normandy, Provence and Brittany. The Christmas log in Berry, it is called Cos Dinor 38, and sometimes Triliafol. Trafio Trufor 3 fires. Imp. The combined strength of several men is needed to bring and set up the Cos Dinor, as it is usually a huge tree trunk intended to fuel the fireplace for the 3 days of the Christmas celebration. During the feudal period, more than one fief was given, with the obligation by the lord to carry the Cos Dinor every year to the home of the suzerain 39. Note 390 Botaric, Treatise on Feudal Rights, p. 645. The log of Null must, as far as possible, come from an uncut oak tree that has been felled at midnight. It is placed in the hearth at the moment the midnight mass rings, and the head of the household, after having sprinkled it with holy water, sets it on fire. It is on both ends of this consecrated log that mothers, especially grandmothers, like to arrange fruits, cakes, and toys of all kinds that the children will joyfully greet when they wake up. Note Fortune, little Jesus, nollet, nolet, child of Christmas. Conservate these debris from the basket of Nor. From one year to the next they are gathered and stored under the master of the house's bed. As those who were crying to go to midnight mass were led to believe they would be taken to the white cock's mass, meaning they would be put to bed. It is never forgotten the next morning to tell them that while they attended this mysterious mass, all these beautiful and good things have been left there for them by little Nollet. Every time thunder is heard, a piece is taken and thrown into the fireplace, and this is sufficient to protect the family from the fire of time, that is, from lightning. Note 41 Lesnel de la Salle vol. I.P. One most often used trognards that are still found in many hedges, split wood, was strictly excluded. The length of these logs explains the form of these giant chimneys of old 42. Note 42 letters G from Henricimont Church. The brackets were designed this way to make lifting it easier. One end would be placed on the large bracket, and the other end would be slid laterally onto the disassembled bracket, using levers, as this log often measured 2 or 3 meters in length and 1 meter in circumference. 1 at sec. In some old houses in our Berry region, I sought to understand why one of the 2 large iron forged brackets was a single piece, while the other could be disassembled into 2 pieces by simply fitting the vertical branch onto the horizontal branch. Forming a simple stool, an octogenarian provided me with the following explanation. In my youth, on the eve of Christmas, they would choose a tree trunk thick enough that it needed to be dragged by a horse for the Trafio Trefu. In Orleans, a province neighbouring Bercy, nearly the same practices existed. The housewife would place in the hearth, in the middle of a thick bed of ashes, and garnished with heather or juniper branches, the strongest log from the firewood. It was usually an enormous coulis log of oak. In Beauce and the Orleans Valley left bank of the Loire, this log is known as trifoi, or trifauio according to the region. The moment of placing, in the carefully cleaned hearth, the traditional log varied according to the country. Here she placed it at the first tolls of the bell, announcing the night office. There they waited for the moment when the bell rang the voice of God, that is to say, the elevation of midnight mass. It was the grandfather, sometimes the youngest child, who, after having sprinkled holy water on it, set fire to it while signing and pronouncing aloud, "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen." The burned wood, known as the treya fou, was meant to burn without flames for 3 days, maintaining a constant and gentle heat in the room where all family members gathered before and after services, but especially before and after midnight mass. However, the Christmas log burned slowly. After the holidays, the remains of the trier-faux were collected and preserved for the next year. 2 strong farmhands slowly carry in the new log, which takes its place, like in a dynasty. They solemnly bring back these embers that, in their day, had cast such beautiful flames to meet the joyful faces of the guests. The patriarch places them in this hearth they have known, and everyone kneels down while reciting the pater. The Christmas log in Normandy here is how Marchangy 1782, 1826, describes this custom in Normandy. The head of the household, accompanied by his sons and servants, goes to the location where, the previous year at the same time, they had stored away the remains of the Christmas log. It is sitting in front of his fireplace that one remained until the moment when, across the fields, one would reach the poor church, where the shepherd's mass was to be celebrated. They say the first log, the second log, the 20th log, the 30th log, which means that the head of the household has already presided over such ceremonies once, twice, 20 times, 30 times. The new log is always the biggest that the woodcutter can find in the forest. It's the strongest part of the tree trunk, or, more often, it's the mass of its enormous roots, called the stump or the Christmas log. These days, the custom of the Christmas log is tending to disappear from Norman countries. For a long time, the poor rural people had to warm themselves around the enormous log, lighting up the company gathered under the chimney's hood, while waiting for midnight mass. As soon as they set it on fire, little children will pray in a corner of the apartment, so that the stump might bring them presents, and while they are praying, they put packages of spices, candies, and candied fruits at each end of this stump. One should judge the eagerness and joy of the children to receive such presents. Light the fire new. Dew nas all grod makes us joyful. The oldest in the family then poured over the wood either milk or honey in memory of Eden, whose loss was repaired by the coming of Jesus, or wine in memory of Noah's vine during the first renewal of the world. Note 43G, Dubosc. Rouen Journal, December 28, 1888. The Christmas log in Provence, the Provence, was brought to the hearth the joyful Carigui, or old olive tree trunk, chosen to burn all night. They solemnly advanced, singing the following words, Cacofeo, hide the fire, old Botofeo. It is in front of the glowing hearth that all these wonderful Christmas legends and traditions were told, passed down through generations by the trembling voices of elders the spinning stones like those of Gurpenville, St. Arnold, Malt, Mainz, which spin 7 times during the night of Christmas, the treasures only revealed when the first bell tolls for midnight mass, the fairy lights dancing on the graves in the cemetery, and many other fantastic tales. God makes us joyful. Calendo comes, everything comes well. If we are not more numerous next year, let us be no less. God grant us the grace to see the next year. God keep us in joy. Christmas comes, all good things come. The youngest child in the house, on his knees, recited these words that his father had taught him. Ho fire, warm during the winter the cold feet of little orphans and infirm old people, spread your light and heat among the poor, and never devour the farmer's stable or the sailor's ship. This very touching scene of the Christmas log fills an entire room in the Arles Museum. Here is its description. 9 life-size mannequins are grouped around the fireplace where the Christmas log is burning. The oldest person on the left is dressed in 18th century costume. He sprinkles, blesses the log with cooked wine, and recites the sacred words. This formula contains both a prayer and happy wishes for the whole family standing before the table laden with traditional dishes. Joy! Joy! May God grant us the grace to see the next year, and if we are not more numerous, let us be no less. In front, sitting down, the old woman spins her distaff. Behind her, the farmer, eldest of the boys, called Lou Pilot, leans against the fireplace, facing his wife. Next to Pilot, his young sister smiling and dreamy, she chats with Lo Rafi Falmond. Near the table on the left, the oldest girl prepares the meal, while in the back the guardian, armed with his trident, and the shepherd with his dog, get ready to join the family feast. A young child listens intently to the grandfather's blessing benediction doc cacho feo. And, quickly, as the log slowly burned out, casting its last sparks, the brave people gathered for the midnight feast opened their windows, and the noble singer told them, "Brave people, the good God has been born, do not forget the poor." Then everyone descended with baskets of cakes and nuggets, for nougat is much loved in the south, and they gave the rest of the feast to the poor. How could we resist the long, standing desire to publish Frederick Mistral's Christmas log, who kindly corresponded with us and provided such interesting insights into Christmas customs? What naivety! What simple and pious beauty! What rusticity full of flavour! Moreover, what proud nobility! Yes, it is thus that the soul of a people should be saved, and the high tradition of a country maintained. Each stanza is supported by a divine breath ex. This graceful, poetic description was originally part of my reel. The author chose to omit it to avoid excessive length. Note 45-45 through. One must be extremely powerful and confident to overlook or relegate such a vivid scene to the margins of their work. Let us relish the translation of these beautiful verses. Note 44-3, Le Musée en Latin, by Jane de Flandresy. Mistral, when he was named a member of the Martials Academy, in this colourful provenve, or language that he speaks so well, gave us, in his speech, a picturesque scene of this charming Christmas Eve. In good old times, on Christmas Eve, after the great family meal, when the blessed ember of the traditional log, the olive branch, turned white under the ashes, and the elder poured the last glass of cooked wine at the table, suddenly, from the already shadowed and deserted street, an angelic voice was heard singing far away into the night. And then the poet tells us a charming legend, that of the good Lady of Christmas who goes down the streets, singing Sabelli's Christmas carols to God's glory, followed by a whole procession of poor people, field and city miseries, country miserables, etc., who have rushed into the festive city. Christmas, Christmas, where is your sweet peace? Where are the laughing faces of little children and young girls? Where is the rough, trembling hand of the old man who makes the sign of the cross over the holy meal? Then the peasant who ploughs leaves his furrow early, and servants and shepherds decamp diligent. Freed from hard work, they go to their mud brick cottage with their parents, to eat a heart of celery, and gaily place the log in the fire with their parents. From the oven, on the table of poplar wood, already comes the Christmas bread, adorned with small holly festooned with trimmings. 3 candles are already lit, 9, clear, sacred, and in 3 white bowls sprouts the new wheat, the harbinger of the harvests. A tall and black wild pear tree bent with old age. The oldest of the house comes, cuts it at the root with a mighty axe, shakes it, and loads it onto his shoulder. Near the Christmas table, he comes to his ancestor's feet to deposit it respectfully. The venerable ancestor in no way wants to give up his old ways. He has tucked in the front of his ample hat, and goes, hurrying, to fetch the bottle. He has put on his long white canvas shirt, his belt, his wedding breeches, and his skin gaiters. He filled the glass of claret in front of the smiling crowd, and poured it 3 times on the fruit tree. The youngest took hold from one side, the oldest from the other, and sisters and brothers, between them, they made it go around the lights, and around the house 3 times. Meanwhile, all the family around him joyfully buzz. "Shall we set the log, children?"
"Joy, yes." Promptly they all answer, "Joy."
The old man cries out, "Joy. May our Lord fill us with joy, and if another year we are not more, my God, let us not be less." You would then see oil cakes and snails in garlic sauce crash into this beautiful feast of cooked wine, almond nougat, and fruits from the vine. In his joy, the good old man lifted the glass high in the air. "Ho fire," he said, "sacred fire, make us have fine weather. Blessed log, light the fire." Immediately, taking hold of the trunk with their brown hands, they threw it whole into the vast hearth. A meagre pleasure for you city dwellers who love your comfort, but what was a night white to us, peasants? Even when we had to walk in the mud and snow, not an old person or woman hesitated. It was indeed time for sleep. No one could have done so. The carillon began the night before after evening Angelus, and repeated every half hour until midnight. One did not yet know umbrellas in Saint Jean Brivelet, or at least one was only aware of our own, which was a subject of wonder and admiration. Women turned up their skirts with pins, put a checked handkerchief over their bonnets, and bravely set off in their clogs to the parish. By a fateful virtue, you would see the 3 candles glow, you would see spirits leap from the dense fire. From the tiny flame you would see the branch lean towards him who will miss the feast. You would see the tablecloth remain white under a burning coal, and cats remain silent. The Christmas log in Brittany 46, note 46.3. This description of the Christmas log in Brittany has been reprinted by numerous newspapers and magazines, Les Annales Politiques, La Revue Fran-Eyes, etc. In Brittany, the greatest celebration of the year was Christmas, and what we poor peasants loved most about this feast was the midnight mass. And during that time, as an added bliss, hunters did not cease firing shots in sign of joy. My father provided the powder. It was a universal detonation. Little boys joined in, at risk of injuring themselves if they could get their hands on a rifle or pistol. The presbytery was a short half league from the village. The rector rode on his bidet, which the sexton held by the bridle. A dozen farmers escorted him, firing rifle shots in his ears. It didn't scare him, as he was an old chowan, and had more than one blue death on his conscience. Nevertheless, he was kind and compassionate, and the most peaceful of men since he began wearing the soutane and the king returned. That evening, great preparations were made at home. Tellin, Charles, and Lihalico measured the hearth and the kitchen door with an important air, as if they hadn't known their dimensions for many years. The purpose was to introduce the Christmas log and choose one as large as possible. They were cutting down a large tree for that. They yoked 4 oxen and dragged it to Kerjaw, that was the name of our house. Then 8 or 10 of us would lift, carry, and place it with great effort. We could get it to stay at the bottom of the hearth. We decorated it with garlands, secured it with logs from young trees, placed a large bouquet of wildflowers, or rather perennial plants, on top. We removed the middle table. The family would eat a bite on the run. The walls were covered in white tablecloths and sheets, as if for Ascension Day. We hung drawings by my sisters Louise and Herman, the Virgin Mary, and the child Jesus. There were also inscriptions, "Et homo factus est." We removed all the chairs to make room, as our visitors were not accustomed to sitting anywhere but on their heels. There was only one chair left for my mother and Aunt Gabriel, whom we treated with deference, who was 86 years old. It was she, my children, who knew stories from the Terror. Everyone around me knew them, and my father more than anyone, if he had wanted to speak. He was a new hand, and his obstinate silence may have been advised by prudence in a country where there were only chawans. At 11:30 we could hear shouting in the street, "Now true person! Now true person! Mr. the Rector, Mr. the Rector!" We repeated this cry in the kitchen, and at that moment all the men came out. Only the women and the family remained. A deep silence fell. The crowd was so great in the kitchen, everyone wanting to be helpful and bringing birch branches, fir branches, holly branches, and the noise was so deafening, due to the nails being hammered and the pots clattering. And there was such a loud noise from outside, bell sounds, gunshots, songs, conversations, and hooves, that one would have thought it was the busiest moment at a fair. The rector arrived, descended from his bidet, which I held by the bridle, that is to say, I was supposed to hold it, but they held it for me. He didn't need to be held, the poor creature. As soon as he stepped down, missed. Moisen climbed the 3 steps of the porch, turned towards the uncovered crowd, took off his hat himself, and said, after making the sign of the cross, "The angel of the Lord announced to Mary." 1,000 voices answered him. After the prayer was finished, he went into the house, greeted my father and mother warmly, Mr. Ozon, the mayor who had just arrived from P.A. Nickpico, and Mr. Ohio, the farrier who was the notary of the peace judge. Mr. Ozon, Mr. Ohio were the greatest lords of the land. The men were packed tightly in the corridor, with the door remaining open, spilling out into the street up to the cemetery. My father and mother stood on the left side of the fireplace. Women whose importance or family connections allowed them to enter the sanctuary, which meant the kitchen here, knelt before the fire in a half-circle. They could read, they were rich, especially the first one. They offered the rector a glass of cider, which he always refused. He left after a few minutes, accompanied by Mr. Ozon and Mr. Ohio, and then they quickly prepared to bless the Christmas log. It only took 10 minutes. Every so often, a woman who had been temporarily held back by tending to the children would break through the ranks forming in front of her and come down on bended knee with the others. If I had remembered the words, I would not fail to note them here. I have forgotten them, which I regret, not for you, who are too civilized to be pleased with such memories, but for myself. Aunt Gabrielle, dressed in her shawl, who announced a great festivity, was on her knees in the middle, just opposite the log, with a holy water sprinkler, and a boxwood branch by her side, and she began to sing a cantic that everyone repeated in chorus. After all, I have no need of Aunt Gabrielle's song, since I no longer know a word of Breton. The tune was monotonous and plaintive, like everything we sing at home during candlelight, yet there was a crescendo, as the blessing was about to begin, which usually gave me goosebumps. Jules Simon. Chapter I, the particularities of the Midnight Mass. This chapter is the most interesting of all, as it is the Midnight Mass that gives the Christmas celebration its great popularity. An ancient practice, dating back to Pope Telesphor's 2nd century, or at least St. Gregory, the great Homily 8th on the Gospel of the day, allows priests to celebrate 3 Masses on Christmas Day. It seems the Church's intention in permitting this custom was to honor the 3 distinct births of Jesus Christ. At 47 in Spain, priests also have the privilege of celebrating 3 Masses on the Day of the Dead, provided they apply them to all the deceased and without honoraries. The Greek Orthodox celebrate only 1 Mass on Christmas Day. The first is his temporal birth in Bethlehem, which the Church honors particularly at the Midnight Mass. This feast is celebrated at the very time when it is commonly believed that our Lord wished to be born. The second is his spiritual birth in the hearts of the faithful, represented by his manifestation to the shepherds, as told in the Gospel read at the Mass at dawn. The third is his eternal birth in the bosom of his Father, reminded at the Mass of the day. The Church has us read there, for Epistle and Gospel, 2 passages from Scripture, where the divinity of Jesus Christ is clearly stated. Although the faithful are only obliged by Church precept to attend one of the 3 Christmas Masses, it is the custom of pious people to hear them all. In Rome, the Pope celebrated the first Christmas Mass, the night Mass, in the church of Santa Maria Maggiore, at the Croce altar. The second Mass was celebrated in the church of St. Anastasia, martyr of Cermic, whose relics were revered in Constantinople. This church was located in the most central district of Rome. The third Mass was celebrated in the church of St. Peter. It was during this Mass that Pope Leo I, crowning Charlemagne Emperor of the West, inaugurated the Holy Roman Empire in 800. Ordinarily, the Pope himself celebrated the 3 Masses. Imagine this immense church as brightly illuminated as if it were daytime. There were lights everywhere, with beams emanating from each column. The sanctuary was particularly ablaze. The midnight Mass, said at Santa Maria Maggiore, was especially solemn. An immense crowd always filled the vast basilica, glowing with its mosaics, bronzes, porphyry, shimmering golden tabernacles adorned with precious stone, and above all its long and majestic nave supported by 8 white marble columns. As soon as the holy relic was exposed for the veneration of the faithful, the Supreme Pontiff began Mass.
And what a Mass!
And all these lights stood out against crimson velvet drapes fringed with gold, which adorned not only the entire church, but also the colonnade. The canons of the basilica proceeded in great pomp to retrieve the poor manger that had served as the cradle of the child Jesus. How the privileged witnesses of this midnight mass, celebrated by the head of the church near the cradle of the Saviour at the very hour when the church recalls his birth, must have been flooded with gentle and inexpressible emotions. After contemplating and admiring these splendours, let us lower our gaze to the humble church of our villages. How beautiful the scene of the night of Christmas is in its moving simplicity. In half darkness the office begins. Above the altar, dominant a creche of branches, some kind of transparent reflects in shimmering waves the trembling light of candles. Midnight. A Saviour is born. Let's sing Christmas. The waxen infant, lying on straw, seems bathed in a flow of gold piercing the clear way of the stable. But an ardent faith animates these believing souls at the mere thought of the mystery being commemorated on this night of Nativity. And inner ecstasy illuminates the little girl's spelling, like the old grandmother who never learned to read 48. All around the choir glows, in letters a metre high, the angel's canticle, the cry of love and adoration, Gloria in excelsis Deo. The sanctuary is quite humble, quite poor. So poor that the flickering candles on the altar and nave have great difficulty dispelling the darkness. And one must, to follow the office in the thick parish book with its alphabetical letters, rely on a lumignon that just now guided the pilgrims through the sleeping countryside. Note 48 read the beautiful pages that Domgar Ranger wrote about the Christmas season. On the way to midnight mass. Jean, my old friend, take your crutch. We must go see the infant Jesus. The burning shell flames and sparkles. Blessed water has been poured over it. If the Virgin, God willing, comes into our home tonight, she will find their embers for her little porridge 49. I have my staff. The snow is hard. Hold on tight. Be careful not to fall. The cold wind already extinguishes my lantern. It's dark. Let's walk gently. Maybe this is the last time, my old friend, that we will see our master, if he is kind enough for these poor wretches. It's about time. To toil, to chop wood, there's an opportunity, always humble and troubled. But the harder one labours in this world, the greater will be one's reward. In paradise, my poor old woman, we won't have cold or hunger. We won't know the night before. The great worry of the next day. Note 49 the Christmas log must burn all night without interruption, even in the absence of those in the house, because the Holy Virgin may need to enter the home to make porridge for the infant Jesus, and she must find the fire ready. Niven legend. Yes, we have lived on earth, both of us, more than 70, 8 years. The time is near when our misery must end. We'll pray to Jesus right away to let us both enter, since the best place he has reserved for the unfortunate. Oh, my dear old friend, what I hope for is to see again in paradise our departed parents, the father and mother, and to find our beloved children there. Ah, Jesus, may no one from our home be missing up there. But here comes the bell ringing. We'll arrive as we should. So, with rounded backs in the breeze, running along the white path, the old folks head towards the church, wobbling and gambolling. Poor people! The song, the scent, the light bring into their bewildered hearts a precursor of delight of the joys in paradise. They have never missed midnight mass since childhood. With the same confidence they are praying today. Although the distance is not great, they are quite weary, but in their dream of hope they do not notice it.
Oh, how the church glows! Oh, so many candles on the altar! Oh, the beautiful songs of joy! Incense smuss! Christmas!
Your prayer is not in vain, good people kneeling, since it charms your sorrow, and your miseries are forgotten. They depart. The moon breaks at the horizon, simulant dawn. On their lips still whispers the sweet and innocent prayer. The couple walks in silence and, under the stings of the frost, the old return to their thatch roof, transfixed joyful.
Christmas, Christmas!
A chill's 1,050,000. Note 53. This charming poem is extracted from one of the numerous works of the renowned Nivernais poet, titled El Hur du Cover. Few this work, like several others, was honoured by the French Academy. In Beaumont, La Féerie Renièvre. Lord Walsh, in his admirable work Christian Festivals, tells us about a midnight mass during the Revolution, which indeed has that simplicity we've mentioned. I remember a midnight mass said in secret during the persecutions of 93. At that time there was no church to celebrate the saints mysterious. A barn was chosen by the inhabitants of the hamlet. The women decorated it during the night before. Thick white canvas sheets were hung all around. A rustic table, covered with the whitest linens, was to serve as an altar. Holly branches with small red berries were placed on each side of the ebony crucifix. 2 resin candles were put in iron candle holders. This was all the pomp of these times of persecution. A midnight mass in exile, Christmas in foreign lands, p. Isolated and without making any noise, the faithful went to the barn prepared for the feast. With what piety these Briton peasants knelt before this so poor altar! When the priest appeared at the altar, tears escaped from every eye. He himself was so moved that he also shed tears that were not without sweetness. Confessor of the faith just a few days ago, he had come close to death, and now he is about to celebrate a mystery of holy joy. 51. Note F1 cf. At 11:30 my mother came to wake me. Alas, I was sleeping so soundly that I did not hear this dear voice, and continued to snore with all my might. On a second call I did not respond any further. 33. Before exploring the very interesting particularities of the midnight mass that our friends have kindly pointed out in all parts of France, we would like to quote a delightful new piece by Auguste Nissard, which could be titled A Missed Midnight Mass, and which can be summarized as follows. Or Mother was waiting so that she could take us with her to the midnight mass. For each of us to have reached our 7th year. Suddenly I fell heavily, and I told my dear mother that I wanted to go back to bed. She didn't oppose. In the morning I was full of regret for my cowardice. Finally, on the 3rd summoning, I opened my eyes, I freed myself from my nocturnal visions, and, pulling one leg then the other from under the sheets, I fell onto my legs rather than standing up. I wasn't quite asleep, nor quite awake. I never consoled myself for this missed midnight mass. Normandy midnight mass it is in the country of cocks above all that the midnight mass was celebrated with great solemnity under the name of Shepherd's Feast. Its origin was entirely Norman. At first, this festival was merely one of those small Latin liturgical dramas that were occasionally interjected, like a sacred game, into the solemn office, such as the Mass of the Star and the Mass of the Ass, which were often performed in the early years of the Middle Ages at the Cathedral of Rouen. The pastorals were also represented in the same church, depicting the pious and nave adoration of the child Jesus by the shepherds. 52. Note 52. 2 manuscripts from the Rouen Library have preserved this primitive staging, which was published by Ducange in his Glossarium. These pastorals gave rise to the Shepherd's Festival. It retained the same naivety in the script, with a rustic tone replacing sacerdotal gravity. The organization of the festival fell to the boys of the village. In Goderville and Frobberville they even elected a master who was responsible for collecting offerings for the redemption of a magnificent blessed loaf. At midnight the old village church faded into a white and icy mist. In the stone clock tower midnight has just struck. The singers have finished the Te Deum. Silence falls throughout the church. What is being awaited? Under the porch and in the central alley, curious onlookers, strangers to the parish, milled about with a constant murmur, seeking, as in city theatres, seated places from which one can see very well. Everyone was drawn by the touching poetic charm that characterized this picturesque ceremony. From all this movement and noise, almost scandalized are the villagers, seated in the well-polished benches, farmers who came with their servants through the rutted paths, old peasants wearing felt hats and wooden sabots, Housewives whose cotton headbands constantly move in a small jerky motion, farmers and their servants, warm within their ample woolen coats, in their dark capes brightened by white, light, and moving pompons. All the boys from the village stood gathered near the baptismal fonts, carrying a white handkerchief, while the master distinguished himself among them by a kind of small napkin with long fringes worn at his waist. To their group joined the shepherds from the country. They had donned their traditional costume, a long limousine with striped sleeves and hood, a felt hat with wide brims, clogs on their feet, and a decorated crook in their hand. At a signal, this formed procession set off. Often preceding them was some kind of lit candle, moved along a wire from one end of the church to the other, from the portal to the altar. This was the march to the star. The shepherds led, or carried a beautiful white lamb, all wrapped up. They came to offer it to the infant Christ, lying in a manger before the altar. Often they would tug at the poor beast's tail, or pierce it with a pin, so that it would bleat during the most solemn moments. But what mainly caught the crowd's gaze was the pall bearing the blessed breads, dazzling with candles and lit tapers. Right in the middle stood a mast carrying 5 platforms, with a decreasing diameter as you went up, giving the appearance of a cone. From the top of this mast, like 4 stays, descended 4 iron branches supporting candelabra arms and torches where many candles shone. This cot-bed, like the one in Neville near St. Valery, was a true monument of joinery, shaped like a pyramid with round and superimposed platforms, adorned with lights, and connected by illuminated girandoles. It was also embellished with pretty tuiles or embroidered tablecloths and lace. Some sort of crank, to use the popular term a chinchor. At the upper part operated all the platforms, which then turned on their axis, projecting the glow of 1,000 tiny candles. Georges Dubos, whose talent and rendition are known to everyone in Normandy if 3. Note 53 through Journal de Rouen, Dec, 2019-01. On the plates rested the blessed bread crowns, adorned with flowers and foliage of holly, laurel, ivy, Christmas roses. A bouquet also finished the pyramidal mast. All this cortege, in which 2 boys were charged with putting the mechanism into motion, at a given moment made the offering of the blessed bread. The famous revolving plates mainly produced a magical effect. We have extracted these details from an excellent article by Mr. At St. Victor-l'Abbaye, 4 little girls, dressed all in white, crowned with roses, bear on their shoulders the living symbol of the child of God, a flawless lamb, embodiment of innocence, purity, and sweetness. 25th, 1904. Midnight Mass in Picardy in most villages, a large group of shepherds and shepherdesses dressed in white would form. The leader of the group, wrapped in ribbons and crowned with flowers, carried a small lamb of snow, white fleece in a beautiful basket. Couching on a soft carpet of warm woolen fabrics, the lamb raises its peaceful little head under a dome of green and flowers, formed by an intertwining of ivy leaves and holly branches, adorned here and there with roses, carnations, and chrysanthemums. Note 54, item def. They would procession to the church, singing local Christmas carols, and accompanied by musettes and tambourines. The priest would bless the innocent creature at midnight mass, amidst universal joy. The fortunate lamblet was then returned to the sheepfold, where it received special care. He was left to die of old age, for through a pious naivety he was regarded as the shepherd of the flock. This old picker custom reminds us of the moving ceremony that takes place each year in Rome, in the church of Sainti Agnes, Hors les Meurs, on the feast day of the glorious martyr, January 21. After Mass, a procession is formed. In the lead, priests in long black coats advance. Each holds aloft a magnificent red velvet cushion adorned with gold fringes, upon which lies a small white lamb of snow white, its head crowned with roses. These lambs are placed on the altar and blessed by the celebrant. They are provided by the Trappist fathers of 3 fountains. After the ceremony just described, they are given to 2 canons of St. Jean D, Latron, who offer them to the Pope. The Pope blesses them anew and entrusts them to the religious of the monastery of sainty C.A. Sile in Trastivia, who care for them with the greatest attention. Their wool is shorn in April, and used to make the palliums, honour cloaks that, after being laid on St. Peter's tomb in Vatican City, are sent by the Pope to archbishops as a symbol of their union with the Roman pontiff. Midnight Mass in Champagne, in Clinchampot, Marne, the blessed bread, topped with a dome of greenery and flowers, is offered at midnight Mass by a young girl dressed in white, like a first communicant. Our dear colleague, who shares these delightful details, explains the striking symbolism. This young girl carries the blessed bread not on her arm, as is usually done, but on her head. The small scaffolding, in the shape of a cupola, that tops the blessed bread, is decorated, especially at the top, with tiny candles lit. The scene is most graceful. The young girl advances solemnly, holding in one hand a well-decorated candle, and in the other balancing on her head a brilliantly illuminated blessed loaf. Although this ceremony excites the curiosity of all present, it is always carried out with the perfect quietist. The blessed loaf suits the mystery of Bethlehem, the house of bread 55, and lit candles represent the celestial light that surrounded the shepherds when the angel announced the joyful birth of he who is the light of the world. 56. I am the light of the world. 57. A light to review humanity. 58. Note 55. Friedrich Hom. St. Gregorith Lek. Matt. Of Christmas. Note 56. John. V. 12. Note 57. Luke. 32. Note 58. Trey. Luke X. 2. In the land of Amagnac, at the beginning of midnight Mass, the Christmas bread is blessed. Every family offers their own. On cuts a piece upon return, which is religiously preserved for the next Christmas. The rest is eaten immediately to start the revelry. In Condemois, every baker offers their clients a Christmas cake as a gift. It's a special bread kneaded with eggs and anise, with an excellent taste. Large families receive several of these cakes from their bakers. They send the most beautiful one to the church to be distributed among the faithful at midnight Mass. These breads are given to the congregation in large quantities. It is customary in many villages of the Pyrenees to have small breads blessed at midnight Mass, which are kept throughout the year and given to livestock when they are sick, particularly to sheep. In Rouergue-Aveyron, after the elevation of the midnight Mass, they sing the Nodelet Christmas Carol, a particular canticle, an embryo of a liturgical drama. The choir of young girls, with their softest voicesto, imitate the angel sings in French, announcing the mystery of this day, and all present respond in dialect, asking for explanations and expressing their astonishment at the birth of a poor god. Identical in substance, the Nodelet varies greatly in form, depending on the various parishes. This dialogue song is also found in Provence and Normandy. In Provence, 4 young people, 3 representing shepherds, and the 4th an angel, advance towards the entrance of the church before midnight Mass. They carry a lamb decorated with ribbons. They sing a dialogue using 2 different tunes, the angel in French and the shepherds in Provençal. The angel invites the shepherds to joyfully approach Bethlehem to adore the Messiah. One of the shepherds, surprised by words he does not understand, calls his companion Jean, who understands French, and asks him to interpret the stranger's words. Jean inquires about the traveller, the purpose of his visit, and why he is making so much noise at the door of their huts. Then the angel announces the birth of Jesus. When this dialogue ends, the angel and the shepherds enter the church, approach the manger, and kneeling down offer the lamb while singing a final verse in chorus. A scene somewhat similar takes place in Normandy at the church of Saint Victor l'Abbaye. But at the sound of the angels' voices, someone responds from the church porch. Before midnight Mass, 4 young girls, gathered at the foot of the altar, stand up and sing this appeal: "Come, shepherds, run all, leave your pastures behind. A new king has been born for you. Bring him your tributes. Do not forget your pipes, nor your sweet bagpipes, and let your new melodies ring out these retreats." These young girls are the herald angels announcing the coming of the Messiah to the sleeping shepherds in the plain of Bethlehem. Their pure and fresh voices delicately nuance the nave invitation. Sometimes it's the rooster with its crowing, sometimes a child crying. People should be left to sleep when they want to. Rough, anxious, with discordant intonations, ignoring any concern for rhythm and measure, he launches the most false notes possible. It is a shepherd's voice who, deliberately gruff, shouts. What is this bothersome voice that strikes my ear? Can I not sleep once without being woken up? This time the shepherd cannot resist. He must have needed a miracle. Ah! What a gleam strikes my eyes, despite the deep night! Surely it is the King of Heaven who has just been born into the world. Unbothered by this somewhat brutal reception, the angels repeat their invitation, which goes unanswered. The shepherd has likely fallen back asleep. Suddenly, on the vault of the choir, immediately above the altar, the brilliant flash of a trail of lightning, Cotton ignites the candles of a vast symbolic star, illuminating the entire church. I already feel in my mind his grace that enlightens me, and his light is enough for such a great mystery. Then the stanzas follow one after another interminably, the angels multiply their exhortations, and the shepherd his praises and protestations of love and fidelity. 58. Note 58 Pierre Villet, Journal de Rouen, Dec 25, 1904. These dialogues remind the custom that used to be had of celebrating the birth of Christ with animated scenes. This practice was followed in our ancient provinces during the night of Christmas. These types of representations, known as Pastoral of 59, eventually degenerated into buffoonery in various ways and led to severe restrictions. Note 59 today, in Paris and several provincial cities, people have started to perform pastorales or Christmas scenes with all the dignity and piety they deserve. A song named Chant des Pastors was alone maintained in our ancient basilicas as well as in country churches. It preceded, in the Landes, the Canticle Benedictus, then the voices of the faithful, the choir, and the children's choir repeated in unison the same words, joining with the harmonious accords of the organ. Sometimes this song was also accompanied by musits, oboes, fifes, and tambourines. The inhabitants of Solitudes in the Marais go to midnight mass by boat, or better yet, a yawl. They can only walk into the village from St. John to All Saints' Day. For the rest of the year, they can only leave by boat. In Pithiviers, the pastoral was performed in 1911 with great success by the young women of Perseverance. Midnight Mass in Vendy, Christmas is always the great popular feast, exclusively religious. There is no time or paths, however bad, that prevent people from attending midnight Mass. So they follow the ditches they know as paths and make their way to the entrance of the town. How to describe these swaying boats in the darkness, with a lantern hanging from a stick, small star probing the waters, swayed by the steps and shaken by the wind 60. Note 6 René Bazin, The Land That Is Dying. In the corners of the ditches illuminated by this flickering light, one can make out strange silhouettes. The sound of oars splashing in the water echoes through the frosted trees, where bundles of grass sometimes block the way, and birds take flight at the rustling of the reeds, letting out a piercing or lamenting cry lapwings, plovers, and coots. Note 62 same source, same location. Pithiviers has also been called Pluviers. Some authors believe this name may come from the plovers once found in the valley of the Egg River. Now this bird is completely extinct. Note 62 when, on a farm in the Marais, there is a sick person who needs to receive the Holy Viaticum, all the residents of nearby hamlets, 2 or 3 kilometers away, are notified. There are several types of plovers, as can be seen at the Carnac Morbihan Museum. The golden plover is a rare and highly sought after gamebird. Hundreds of voices joyous Christmas carols, and the echoes respond across the vast expanse of flooded meadows. A small boat from each house, with several people, heads towards the ditch that the priest will follow with the Holy Sacrament. As soon as the priest has passed, each of the boats that met him follows suit, and thus one arrives with an entire little fleet to the sick person's home. It is very poetic and very edifying. When they caught one alive, They would present it as a gift to the parish priest. Note 63. Christmas in foreign lands, the little birds wake up call P14. In Entregues Vaucluse, on the eve of Christmas, young people would pursue the small birds known as Petersus, Pitua by the Comptadins. The midnight Mass in Provence Christmas celebrations take place with great enthusiasm, religionty, naivety, and grace throughout all of Provence and the Comtat. There exists in Provence a custom that reminds of the Swedish tradition, associating birds with the solemnity of Christmas. According to Barjevel's account in his book on Vaucluse's dialectic proverbs and nicknames, after midnight Mass, the priest would climb onto the pulpit, holding the decorated bird wrapped in pink ribbon, and release it inside the church before a large congregation. A similar custom was also practiced in Mirabeau from time immemorial. Young men brought a live robin to the Grand Mass, accompanied by a tambourine. They received 3 francs from the priest. In Mazan and several neighbouring areas, a large number of people brought various birds to midnight Mass, which were released at the elevation, adding to the festive atmosphere with their joyful chirping. Selecting one of the smallest birds might have symbolized directing the worshippers' thoughts towards the infant Jesus in Bethlehem. The solemn act of setting the bird free by the pastor could naively represent the liberation of humanity's soul from Satan's grasp upon the arrival of the Messiah. It must have been a graceful sight as these multitudes of small birds returned to the Creaci, surrounded by many green branches, an imperfect image of their usual retreat. The glow of a bright light, reminiscent of the sun, enhanced the illusion, and the song of the birds seemed to blend with the heavenly voices of the angels, announcing the whole of humanity the august and comforting mystery of Christmas 64. Note 64, Les Cloches Provençales, December 25, 1905. This usage reminds one of the release of birds that took place in the Cathedral of Rouen on Pentecost Sunday. Here is what the old Norman chronicler relates. During the Veni Creator, from the high vaults, the treasury officials of the cathedral threw down, upon a crowd of people present, a quantity of tree leaves, burning torches, and birds up to the Gospel 60. Note 60, Fyron, History of Rouen, Volume I, 3rd part, in the chapter on general processions. It is known that Christian symbolism has often represented Holy Spirit as a mystical dove descending from a glowing cloud. The small town Desbock 66, located 3 leagues from a slope of the Alps, has preserved ancestral traditions intact, and every year at Christmas a curious ceremony renews itself. Note 66.3. Grand sight that attracts both travellers and artists. When the midnight Mass tolls, all the shepherds and shepherdesses from the land make their way to the church, where a magnificent nativity scene glows near the altar on rocky terrain. They press around it, kneel down, and when all the faithful are gathered, with not a single shepherdess or pastor missing, one of them begins to sing joyous Christmas. After him, another shepherd sings the second verse, this time in Provence all. Shepherdesses follow, dressed in white with belts of dawn and azure, accompanied by shepherds in dark cloaks. The one who follows the cart stops it at the foot of the altar, and they alternate like this while the fife and tambourine play the refrain. Then the adoration of the shepherds begins. A picturesque procession advances towards the altar. First, a little flowery cart with a decorated ram pulling it, where a sleeping lamb lies down. So gently he takes the lamb on his lap, approaches the officiant, kisses his stole, and turns to his companion. He makes a salute. She bows. The shepherd extends the lamb to the shepherdess, who in turn turns to her neighbour to pass on the gift. Hand to hand, the lamb goes along with the same graceful salutes and bows, finally becoming the gift to the manger. Some of the shepherds must bow carefully before the lamb. They indeed wear a fragile hairstyle, a basket filled with a cake. Note 67.3, the pilgrim deck. They carry large baskets filled with fruits and birds of different species. The shepherds suspend these baskets to their belts with a ribbon, and the women carry them on their heads. 1906. A ceremony somewhat similar takes place in some communes near Arles at midnight Mass. At the moment of the offering, one sees the bodies of the shepherds advance towards the altar, preceded by the tambourine, the bagpipe, and all the rustic instruments that can be gathered in the region. In Marseille, the priors are adorned with the garbelin, a graceful bundle in the shape of a conical hat, very high, garnished all around with apples and oranges. Following the body of the shepherds is a small chariot completely covered in greenery, illuminated by a multitude of candles and dragged by a sheep whose fleece, of dazzling whiteness, is still tied with ribbon knots arranged as snowflakes. The spotless lamb is inside the chariot. A second troop of shepherds and shepherdesses, playing and singing Christmas carols, closes the procession. The priors offer the lamb and the baskets, and the cortege returns in the same order. The same ceremony is repeated at dawn mass and that of the day 68. Curious details: they carried a star on the end of a staff called a guy-redden, and the procession ended with a group of young girls armed with an epee, its point adorned with pieces of silver, which was placed in the manger. Note 68. These details are provided by the authors of the Statistics of Boches, Du, Raubny, in 1872, in the village of Lagens Vaucluse. Shepherds and shepherdesses, dressed in costumes and laden with rustic presents, celebrated the Nativity. In the distance one hears the muffled beat of a tambourine and the shrill sound of fifer. Soon they are at the door. Children shout, "The cart!" We quote directly the account we were given of the shepherds' procession at midnight mass in Ailsa, Sorgue, Vaucluse. At midnight mass, just before it began, while the Te Deum that concludes matins is solemnly sung to the harmonious sounds of the organ, a distinct movement occurs within the church. They enter the church while playing a resounding, rustic, and traditional air that it would be impossible to do justice to, but whose energy and joy electrify the large audience. The cart. The cart is a small two-wheeled chariot. It is covered, but the open sides are closed by small artistically twisted bars. It is decorated with ivy garlands and ribboned. It is pulled by 2 white sheep, preceded by a tambourine, a flute, and tinklets, the bales or farmers in front, one of whom carries a tiny white lamb. They will take their place next to the nativity scene, which occupies one of the vast lateral chapels in the centre of the nave. Silence falls, religious emotion is visible. This calm is only occasionally interrupted by the bleating of the lamb, answered by that of its mother sheep, a deeper bleat an octave lower, but with a charming and touching contrast. With the service concluded, the Mass begins. After Incarnatus Est, the deacon detaches himself, accompanied by the choir children 20, 4 of them, all dressed in red, and goes to the nativity scene. Upon completion of the credo and the offering, the organ signals the start with the obligatory air as above, repeated by the chimes, pipe organ, and tambourine. There, after incense is offered to the child Jesus, he takes him and brings him to his fragile crib. He is preceded by the choir children and the bales, people carrying candles. The first, bale, places his beloved white lamb on the altar.
What majesty!
What nave grace! They advance slowly, all under the impact of emotion that must have been that of the shepherds at the manger in Bethlehem. The lamb bleats from time to time. It is the beautiful moment. Everything is prepared: online dances, torches lit, the cart with the richly harnessed sheep, the little lamb between the arms of the first bale, crowned with a sparkling diadem and covered with a magnificent scarlet cloak, leading the procession and heading towards the altar. It is indeed the scene of Bethlehem. It is indeed the shepherds arriving at the manger to adore the divine child. Crushed under human form, one would like to be part of the procession approaching the altar. Everyone is standing, everyone wants to see the sheep, the fully illuminated cart in which pigeons, chickens, and small birds can be seen, as well as a rabbit curled up in the corner of the vehicle. Enthusiasm is at its peak. Tears flow from many believers' eyes. The celebrant, who has already kissed the divine child, is there, surrounded by the deacon, the subdeacon, and the chorister children. He holds in his hands the little Jesus, whom he first allows to be kissed by the Swiss, who has lifted his hat, then by all the nobles, and those who joined them, afterwards by the rural music, and the shepherds leading the sheep. Everyone circles the altar, following the cart drawn by the sheep, and then returns to the manger where the deacon will place the bambino. Thus ends this offering that will be repeated at the Mass of the day, and at that of purification on February soon. What? So late on the journey? Didn't you meet the dogs in the village? My God, alone and so late in the hollow of the roads? Come warm your hands at this Christmas fire. Christmas! Do you remember it? A midnight mass in Brittany. Bresax, the Breton poet par excellence, deceased in 1854, who only sings of his native land, the granite land covered with oaks as described, with the freshness and sincerity of inspiration. A midnight mass in the land of gorse and heather. Open! It's me, Joseph! When, to build the nativity scene, priests let us gather fresh moss. Don't laugh. It's Christmas that guides me here. I come to hear midnight mass once more. By a joyful carillon was finally announced the midnight office. They saw this night the legion of angels pass by, and from the Most High sing praises, Glory to God. Glory to God in his immensity, peace on earth to men of goodwill. The path is frozen, said Joseph Daniel as he crossed the moorland. Every step resounds. How big the moon is! Do you hear voices in the meadow behind us? Yes, I hear Christians, shepherds like yourselves. And all shall adore Jesus, the dear child, the King of the poor, the God born in the manger. Living memories. The night for this beautiful sky, as we walked celebrating Christmas, trees, bushes, and the walls of the presbytery, in the brown mist past with mystery. The whole church is full, and bending their bare foreheads, the pious assistants sing of the child Jesus. Every woman in her hand holds a piece of candle. The manger has been placed on the altar of the Virgin. I recognize the saints, the lamps, the two crosses. Finally, everything in the church was as it once was. I remained like a shadow, motionless in my place, silent, or weeping with both hands over my face. Note 69 Brasieux, Poem of Mary, A Midnight Mass in Paris. Among the memories of my earliest childhood, writes Francois Copier, there is one particularly sweet, which surges up from the depths of my memory now. It's of a Christmas Mass. At communion, when the priest arrived offering the body of Christ, my forehead rose. Men, children, and women then walked slowly towards the blessed table, and, as at a feast where many are invited, as soon as a communiant received the host, from the Savoy emerged the white Eucharisty, 69. A snow had fallen in abundance in the days preceding, then a sharp freeze had hardened the white, frosty carpet, and the streets, then little frequented, of this part of St. Germain Faubourg, reminded one of the retreat of the great army across the steppes of Russia and the crossing of the Berezina. The whole family had intended to attend the midnight mass, but, in view of the severity of the temperature, it was decided that the women would stay by the fire, and that only the menner was one of them. Consider, 5 years and a half old would dare venture outside. The church packed with people, the suffocating heat, the powerful scent of incense, the harmonious rumble of the organ, the countless lights of the candles that seemed like a golden rain frozen in place. You recall and feel all of this as if it were happening again. So, when the bells began to ring in the starlit sky, my mother carefully bundled me and my father up in overcoats and face masks, and, crunching through the frozen snow beneath our shoes, we both made our way along Rue Vanu and Rue de Varennes to the chapel of the Foreign Missions, which was then our parish. The critch especially, the critch with its characters and painted wooden animals, and its little wax Jesus, adorned by strands of straw like rays, amazed my child's eyes. 70 Note 7 Francois Copy, A Distant Christmas, a midnight mass in the church of Our Lady of Bethlehem, in Ferry-Rez, in G. Tines. In the second year of his pontificate, St. Peter sent Saints Savinien, Potentin, and Alton to preach the gospel in Gaul. It was in the middle of winter, at the end of December. The 3 apostles had withdrawn to a hospitable hut belonging to one of these poor blacksmiths, located not far from the river. After a long and perilous journey, the new apostles arrived at a secluded place by a small river called Clela, not far from where the Roman road from Auxerre to Chartres intersects with the road from Genabum to Sens, at a distance of 9 leagues from the latter city. Sparse inhabitants lived amidst the rugged natural landscape of these areas, residing in rough shelters protected by silent forests. They gathered iron ore, whose abundant deposits appeared here and there, and processed it in forge kilns that later gave the city built at this site the name ironworks. Surrounded by people from the surrounding area who had come to witness these strangers, they began to proclaim the religion of Jesus, who died on a cross to save us. Soon, a great number of the inhabitants were converted by their words, and especially by the miracles that accompanied them. But among all these miracles, the most striking one occurred on Christmas Eve, around midnight, in a small chapel where the Christian community was gathered to pray and celebrate the anniversary of the birth of the child Jesus. Saint Savinian was celebrating Mass. Suddenly, a mysterious light filled the sacred enclosure. The assistants, overcome with emotion, lifting their eyes to heaven, were able to freely contemplate the child Jesus, the Holy Virgin, Saint Joseph, above the manger. The angels sang their harmonious canticle Gloria in excelsis Deo. Saint Savinian, transported with admiration and joy, exclaimed, "Here is Bethlehem." The messengers of Saint Peter, filled with bliss, for a moment believed they were in the stable of the Nativity. That is why they named their chapel Nota Dame de Bethlehem 71. Note 71.3, this apparition stands for having occurred during the lifetime of the Holy Virgin. Such is, according to the Acts of the Great Passion of Saint Savinian and his companions, martyrs 5th century, the origin of the first sanctuary dedicated to the Mother of God on French soil. Without mentioning the famous donkey of the prophet Balaam. It was on a donkey that the Holy Family fled to Egypt, and it was still on a donkey that our Lord triumphantly entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. Thus ended the beginning of this cult that has remained vibrant for 18 centuries, attracting countless pilgrims each year to ferry Res du G. Tines at the sanctuary of Our Lady of Bethlehem 72. Note 702, Yugni Jerose, History of an Abbey, pp. 12-14. Donkey Festival Ruin. The donkey played a certain role in medieval ceremonies. Although this animal is known for being sober, patient, diligent, and almost inexhaustible, it was not celebrated for these precious qualities, but rather because of the various episodes recalled in Scripture. The donkey festival is believed to originate from Verona 73, from where it spread throughout Christendom during the Middle Ages, 424-427. After Tierce there was the procession of donkeys. The cortege followed the cloister and the great nave. The canons were dressed as prophets. Note 73.3. According to some traditions, the bread which carried our Lord is said to have died in this city. According to Ducange 74, who reproduces the Ode Ordinary of Rouen Cathedral, the pastor's office was celebrated in this church on Christmas night. The canons, dressed as shepherds and the choristers as angels, came after the Te Deum of Matins to adore Jesus Christ in the manger behind the altar. Note 74.3, Glossarium ad Scriptores mediat infimi Latinitatis, Paris, 1733. Art. Festum Asinorum, Vol. 3. Halls. You could see Isaiah Zachary, John the Baptist, even Balaam with his donkey, which gave rise to the name procession of donkeys. Nebuchadnezzar, the 3 children in the furnace, also appeared, just as well as Virgil and the Sibyl. Footnote 7.6 in Nicolay. At the Mass, we did not lack for singing the Proas 75. Note 75 refer in History of Rouen, Volume I, Part 3, in the chapter on general processions. Mr. Nicolay, translating the Glossarium by Ducange almost literally, admirably describes all this Pastoral 76. The chanters began by vehemently addressing the Jews and the Gentiles, who responded from their place with a no less forceful verse. Sit. In the middle of the cathedral's nave, a kind of pyre was erected, composed of linens and rags, and after singing terce a procession is ordered after 3rd hour. The clergy made a processional circuit around the cloister, then stopped in the centre of the church between troops representing, one the Jews, the other the Gentiles. At the end of the building, numerous characters were gathered to play the role of prophets from the Old Testament. The same singers, addressing him who played the role of Moses, said, "Behold Moses, the lawgiver." A Moses with a long beard, wearing a horn on his forehead cornuta facie, dressed in an alb and a chasuble, holding a staff in one hand and the tables of the law in the other, sang in turn a prophetic song about the birth of Christ. Then a procession, celebrating the praises of the Messiah, led Moses near the altar. The same ceremony was repeated for each of the successively called prophets. They advanced as they were summoned. Moses was followed by Amos, an old-bearded man holding an ear of corn, then Isaiah, dressed in an alb, with his forehead bound in a red bandana, followed by Aaron, covered in papal ornaments, mitre on his head, preceding Jeremiah in sacerdotal robes and holding a small ball in his hand. Daniel, represented by a young clergyman, was draped in a green tunic, and the prophet Habakkuk, an old man with a limp, followed adorned with a dalmatic. In a vessel were roots that he ate between verses. After him Balak, riding on an ass, held the reins and struck the ass with his spurs, while a young man, blocking his path with a sword, forced him to stop. The young man represents the armed angel spoken of in Scripture in the story of Balak. A clergyman, hiding under the ass, then spoke in a strange voice, "Why are you tearing me apart with these spurs?" Then the angel said to Balak, "Refrain from pursuing the king's plans." And the singers would say Balak prophecies, and Balaam would reply, "A star will rise from Jacob, or at a stella X, Jacob 77. Note 77 from Num. X6 Then Balaam adorned, sitting on a donkey, hence his festal name holding calcarea a tool. Let the donkey retain its load and trample on the donkey, and some young man, holding a sword, obstructs the donkey. Someone under the donkey says, "Why am I so sorely troubled by your calcaribus?" Having said this, an angel tells him, "Cease to fulfill the king Balak's command." The heralds say, "Balaam prophecy." Then Balaam responds, "A star will appear from Jacob. Dukange Loch, sit." Succeeding Balaam was the prophet Samuel. Then David, adorned with the symbols of royalty. Following the prophets, one saw Zechariah, dressed as a Jew, and accompanied by his wife Elizabeth, clothed in white, their son John the Baptist at bare feet. Behind him stood the old Simeon, and finally Virgil, whose face shone with youth 78, who was a bit astonished to find himself in such holy company. It was usually he who closed the march. Note 78 through all the characters in the procession, except Daniel and Virgil, wore beards. Their names are always accompanied, in Dukange, by the epithet Barbatus. If one were to include the great Latin poet in the Christmas procession, it is because he was believed to have predicted the birth of the Saviour. Indeed, we read in the eclogue addressed to Consul Polion the following lines: "The final age of Cumaean song has come. A grand order emerges from the whole of history. The Virgin returns and Saturnian rule is restored. A new generation is sent down from heaven high. You now reign, O child who ends Iron's reign and brings forth a golden race for the world, pure, favourable. Lucina Apollo reigns in you. 79 note 79 tree buck, eclogue ziv. Behold, the final age foretold by the oracle of Cumes has arrived." The great revolution of centuries is about to resume its course. Already a virgin returns, and Saturnus restores the golden age. Already a child will descend from heaven. Watch over him with jealous care, O chaste Lucine! It is by him that the Iron Age will cease, and that the Golden Age will return to the earth. Already your Apollo reigns. One is also surprised to see the Sibyl in this procession. However, it is quite generally admitted that the Sibyls could know and foresee the future. Saint Jerome attributed the gift of prophecy to them, and the Church, in the prose of the dead, invokes the authority of the Sibyl and seems to equate her with the very authority of David, as David with the Sibyl. The Christmas procession often ended, says the Memorial of Ruin 80, with a clerk dressed as a Sibyl, wearing a crown on his head and singing verses containing predictions. Note ordinarium Rothamagents, cited by Ducange in his Glossarium, Sv. Festum. This is the reason why Michelangelo depicted them in the famous frescoes of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and Raphael in the church of Santa Maria della Pace in Rome. As for the prose of the ass, we have found no documents proving that it was sung at the Christmas Mass. From the lands of the East an ass has come, beautiful and strong, apt to bear the loads. Ho, sir ass, ho! This canticle was not shocking in either taste or decency. Only Ferrin asserts this, therefore we are inclined to believe it was sung outside the church. It began with this stanza: from the lands of the East an ass has arrived, beautiful and strong, most suitable for carrying burdens. Ho, sir ass, ho! Such was the Hass's feast, of which much ill was spoken, as it lent itself to certain abuses, and quickly degenerated into a procession unworthy of the sanctuary, leading to its prohibition by church authority. It is no less true that she was born of a thought, an ingenious interpretation, and staging of prophecies about the Messiah. We will conclude this chapter with the enchanting use of the Christmas Scala. In a dry and wild cos, at the foot of a rock perched on a cliff, is an ancient pilgrimage between sky and earth. It is called Rocamadour, a holy place, and one of the most revered, where to reach the chapel one must climb 200 steps. There survives a touching custom. Every Christmas Eve, young and old from this village seem to storm heaven. Such in Rome, the holy crowd climbing to Latran on their knees the Santa Scala, all marked with the blood of Christ shed for us. The entire population kneels as they ascend each step, reciting on every stone the Archangel's sweet Hail Mary. And the priests lead this strange ascent to the cheerful sound of the musette, with difficulty and devotion. This meal had its reason for existence due to the fasting of the previous day, the lack of sleep, the length of the night offices, which often lasted several hours 81, and also the fatigue of a long journey made to reach the church. Comtesse O'Mahony. Chapter of the Midnight Mass and Christmas Cake. The Midnight Mass, as we have said, was usually preceded by a meagre repast known as the Gros Souper in Provence. It was followed by a fatty meal called the Unravel in all countries. Note 81. The Grand Midnight Mass was preceded by the 3 nocturnes of Matins and followed by Lauds. Such was the origin of the Rere Velen. We will speak successively about the groups of questors for the Rere Velen, the meal itself, and Christmas cakes. I. The Collectors El Guilloné in the country of Armagnac El Guilloné is the Christmas carol. It is in Gascon patois. Throughout the entire month of December, young people who are to draw lots sing Argule in the evening after dinner, in front of the doors. As a reward they are given some coins, eggs, flour, or chestnuts. With the proceeds from this collection they prepare the Christmas Eve feast Rare Velen. A Lagulolai is sung to a very graceful and captivating melody. The singers Lasagillans wear the blue brit of the country, embroidered with red, yellow, green, and white wool, topped off with a pompon in multiple colours. This colourful costume is what they proudly wear while strolling through fairs and markets. Abbot B. from the Diocese of Och. The song of the Aguiloni 1. 3 companions arrived at the door of a knight. Refrain, kind sir, the Aguiloni we must give to our companions too. Wishing for good fortune, open the door, they will enter. We must not forget. Our kind correspondent tells us that we are in the gentle land of Armagnac, the land of good wine and cheerful sunshine, where we love to laugh and have fun. There are brave people everywhere, and if the heads are a little light, the hearts are always good. 82, note 82.2 to miss. Gentle lord, the stimulated one it is necessary to give to the companions. To here blows the wind of yesteryear. Open the door, we will enter. 3 brave people, light up the candle, we bring you a great news, and so on, and so forth. The stanzas of the stimulated one continue indefinitely, always ending with wishes related to the alms received or refused. Kind sir, and repeat the refrain at each verse 3. Brave people, all illuminated, but we have no great beauty. 4. In Bethlehem, listen well, Jesus was born. 5. We offer a blessing. Into his arms let us lay the Saviour. 6. We give a small gift. He will smile upon our efforts. 7. Let us sing a song. He will laugh at the world's folly. And so on. 4. For Christmas. Listen well. Jesus is going to be born in Bethlehem. 5. Give us at least a little cradle to lay the Saviour in. 6. Give us a violet to put in his little hand. 7. Teach us a song to make the little child laugh. Around Plough Mull, the eve of Christmas, when evening falls, children gather in small groups of 3 or 4 and go from door to door, illuminated by a candle held by their leader. May he bless this house, for we have been given something good. This song, as seen from the text itself, is mainly about Christmas. It's sung during collections that take place throughout the month of December. If the singers receive nothing, they say the most unpleasant things. For example, God, conserve your health like water in a leaky basket. But if a generous donor comes along, we wish all sorts of prosperity to his home. For example, God bless him with as many geese as there are tufts of grass. May the good God give you as many geese as there are blades of grass in the meadows. The traditional song repeated by children during Advent, the old quest song around ruin, is still this one in Little Crumb. Little Crumb, we have little crumbs in our pocket to throw at your chickens if they lay big eggs. Mum, give me 2. Oh, yes. After receiving a few coins or treats, they move on to the next door to repeat the song. They first ask the household if they should sing no. If the answer is yes, they perform the following stanza. Sing, no, my good lady, sing no, you and I. For an apple, for a pear, for a little sip of cider to drink. Sing Noah. In some parishes in the Harts, Pyrenees, between Lourdes and Bagnes-Rez, children go out in the morning of the eve of Christmas to play music. At every house, each child receives a small loaf of bread baked specially by the household. Regularly, poor lone children should go to this alms distribution, but through camaraderie and amusement, the children of wealthy families join them. These merry beggars are known in the local dialect as Is al Gras, meaning the joyful ones. This word is only ever used at Christmas. In the Valley of Arrows, in the centre of the same department, 30 years ago, children would run from house to house on the eve of Christmas, asking for la pruis, that is, apples, nuts, and treats. This custom has almost disappeared. In the country of Arabat Landis, rural children form joyful groups on the eve of Christmas. They go around soliciting offerings in front of every house where a baptism has taken place during the year. Pig how? Ho, pig cut. Cut, give alms to the children. Pig hus, hus. Loaves 83 to each of them. Pig hunger, beg, the largest portion be mine. Note 83, aniseed bread. They then sing a well-known refrain commonly known as Lo pig ho, pig ho. Ho pig tal dat lamoin aile canile. Pig hus, has loaves of bread in the house. Pig hunger. Hunger the mother parts that if the magnanimity. Woe betide him who turns a deaf ear. The children, in their shrillest tone, would shout a vengeful refrain, but too coarse to be repeated. Aye. The meal in Orléanaise. The midnight mass had traditional dishes and songs. The pig was on the menu for this feast. It was served in all forms and parts on the table. Everywhere its blood appeared as succulent boudin, and its meat chopped into crab pinnets, a long sausage that, in some communities, was served to each person upon returning from midnight mass. The end of the meal was brightened by the singing of local Christmas carols. In Anjou families, it was customary at Christmas to slaughter a pig that had been fattened up. Early in the morning, the butcher, accompanied by his assistants, would go to people's homes, and after bleeding, skinning 84 the pig, then cutting its meat, he would start making sausages and blood sausages, as they needed to be sent to all relatives and friends. Note 84 tree, epaulet, remove the hair. By evening a large bronze cauldron was placed over the fire. This cauldron was filled with the pig's meat, cut into small pieces and intended for making rillocks. Afterwards, they would go to the parish church, carrying on a large platter a beautiful ham covered with greenery. The ham was placed in front of the high altar. The head of the family would bless himself, sprinkle holy water on the fire, then add 3 measures of salt to the cauldron. At dawn the rilurks were cooked, and then one could enjoy, in this joyful meal, the remnants of the night. A priest, dressed in choir robes, came to bless it, and recited a prayer dedicated to this ceremony, a prayer that is still found in our ancient medieval rituals. After the blessing, the ham was taken home and hung in the fireplace until Easter. On that day it was removed and placed on the table around which the family would gather to break their Lent fast with this blessed meat 85, and as dessert a hot and golden rissel filled with prunes or apples. Christmas Day is a day of great joy. It is the master, the bourgeoisie, who spoils the family and servants. Note 85 excerpt from the Historical and Monumental Bulletin of Anjou. In Rouergue-Aveyron, while warming up around the succonodolengo that is flamboyantly burning, one revives with a good piece of sausage cooked to perfection by the homemaker, or, if there's no sausage, one simply indulges in a piece of salted pork preserved since last carnival. It is his responsibility to arrange everything, for this day is the feast of the little ones, the humble, the servants, the master pays, to everyone in the household. But on King's Day it will be his turn to celebrate. In their turn the servants will pay, or are expected to pay, and once again that night there will be great rejoicing on the farm, illuminated by the great fire in the fireplace, as well as by the ceiling lamp. Note 86 Abbé Emy, from the Diocese of Rodez. In Poitou Lucas, curate of Moing, Dame de la Garde Poitiers, composed a null where he describes what kind of vigil was celebrated after midnight Mass Condita on Christmas Day, made a feast like no other, which was done long ago, and welcomed all who came. Apocryphs, Carapi wine, and Fémongeau, to enlighten every nose Christmas. Even a bottle maker came who never ceased to pour until a quart of it was dry in eternal centuries. Suit the menu. Perdrix, chapons, wild birds, herons, leveralts, herons, cognals, pheasants, boars, snails in hot sauce. That's for the main dishes, and I forget some. Now, for dessert, pastry, crêpes foursucs, dry cakes, chapter breads, burnt for bad teeth, with wine. In the absence of the small claret wine from Poitiers, we had some reserve hidden, capel without juice, or sweet poyer, to splash on songs that didn't stop flowing 87. Note 87 true, J. Norrie. In the Harz, Alpes, Christmas is the great day for family gatherings. It is customary to eat, after midnight mass, soups of pité called sazanes or crucettes. At the market preceding the feast, women provision themselves with a candle per household, as on Christmas Eve, neither bewillen, blank soaked in oil, nor resinous wood, that serves as light is used, like in Russian villages. In Var, after midnight mass, tortas, large round cakes made with honey, flour, jam, and oil, unfreeze all brosi 8. Note 88 Abchi, from the Diocese of Freiherges Var, in Armagnac. The head of the family takes the first sip from a glass full of wine and proposes a toast to the health of all his loved ones. The glass then passes hand to hand. The same toast is repeated, and at the end of the meal, each in turn drinks to the health of those family members who are absent due to necessity. In front of the Christmas log, as we leave for midnight mass, we let the pot of daube simmer, which is the base of the reverie. Daube is a national and truly Gascon dish. It consists of a piece of beef, cooked in a black sauce, made with red wine and various spices. One would not understand an Armagnac Christmas dinner without daube. We finish with grilled chestnuts, drizzled with new wine 89. Even the poorest families can afford this gastronomic luxury, and if their misery prevents them from enjoying this treat, generous neighbours make it their duty to provide it for them. The reverie is completed with long slices of sausages cooked on the grill, always using the coals from the log. And note 89 true, Father B., from the Diocese of Och. If you want some notes on Christmas celebrations in our beautiful Bayan, I can provide them for you. Everything happened very simply. The friends gathered. We sang B.A. Arnis Noel songs, waiting for midnight mass. We were roasted chestnuts, and given to drink that excellent white wine that our good Henry Ive, the Bernese, loved so much. However, it was given to us in very small doses, as it is strong. Then we were put to bed, promised to be woken at the right time. And the next day, great despair at not having been awakened on time, but the deed was done, and one went to see the little Jesus in his manger, where we promised to be good. This happened during my early childhood, 3/4 of a century ago, 90. Note 9. Mrs. the Countess of X. In the mountains of G.A. Varden-Lozerie, one arrives at 3 o'clock in the morning for midnight mass. One takes a firelit air and sits down to table. For centuries, the menu has always been the same: pork ear, rice pudding, sausage, cheese. In the past, everything was watered with viverise, a true nectar known only by the old. Today, it is Languedoc that appears on the table of our mountaineers. It easily rises to the head, but it does not rejoice the heart. 91. Note 91, Mr. the Abbé Elard. From the Diocese of Mende. In Corsica, in poor families, one eats, on New Year's Eve, the traditional polenta, a porridge made from chestnut or corn flour, with slices of pork killed expressly the previous day. In the Byzantine country, upon returning from midnight mass, one takes a little hot wine. With a small slice of bread, it is called the moilot. For Christmas Day, a large batch of cakes is currently made. Formerly, in the mountains, when one usually ate oat and barley bread, for Christmas they prepared barley bread mixed with a little wheat. Each had his or her own maichot. The mother of the family made sure to have one more for the first poor person who passed by. They called it P.D.A., the share for God. In the Cock's country sign inferior, in the countryside, the midnight feast is reduced to the most modest proportions. While the traditional Christmas log burns in the hearth, one makes do with a frugal meal that sometimes includes a fricassee of birds caught in the evening at Southard. They sometimes finish with a cup of flip, a hot drink made of sweet cider, brandy, and sugar reduced over fire. In Alsace, the midnight feast is prepared with sausages, hams, and bodens soaked in white wine. This is called Kotelschmoss. We have mentioned that in England, at Christmas time, there is a considerable consumption of fat geese, 92. It was thus in our southern provinces of France. There was no celebration in Languedoc and Bayonne, where the ancient guardian of the capital was not present at the honour place. De Talleyrand used to serve his guests the traditional goose, of which he had himself devised the recipe. Would you like to know it? Brown a casserole with strips of lard and ham slices. Most often, the midnight meal consisted of a good cabbage soup, whose cauldron had been buried under the ashes before departing for midnight mass, a roasted goose, fresh sausage, and foie gras PTA. Note 92, Christmas in foreign countries, P16. On Christmas Day, please add some onions pierced with cloves, a garlic clove, some thyme, and laurel. On this perfumed mattress, place a plump young goose, carefully stuffed with foie and cock's crest, pour generously with sortons, sprinkle lightly with nutmeg, and drop some bitter orange drops. Finally, cover with buttered paper, and fire above and below, let it cook. Indeed, Mr. de Talleyrand had much wit. The Christmas goose is indeed a true roast for holidays. As the bells ring in the sky their joyful chimes, while the sausage smokes and sizzles on the grill, the chestnuts sparkle under the ashes, the family cakes form their flaked dome, the smoking goose is placed in the centre of the table, to the applause of the guests. Soon succulent chestnuts escape from its perfumed flanks. Children hold out their plates, exclaiming, "Christmas! Christmas!" And the sweet voice of the bells seems to answer them. For your Jesus, Chilborn, Gart 1933 Fulbert Dumontiel. Mrs. The table was centred with an entire lamb. On the immense sideboard, which occupied an entire panel of the room, orange trees framed the pitchers and silver and vermeil cutlery. Jets from a high fountain further perfumed the air with the essence of the most fragrant and varied flowers. De Vigne, on Christmas night in the year 1677, hosted a festive gathering at a magnificent carnival-lit hotel, now transformed into a museum of Paris' historical, ancient and modern past. Following the customary ceremony, Coulagne set fire to the Christmas log in the Grand Henry high fireplace. The festivities continued amidst 8 services, whose simple enumeration, due to their abundant and varied consistency, would be enough to terrify modern stomachs. It suffices to indicate that after the soups, entry is 2 services of roasted meats, large and small game, followed by the service of fish, salmon, trout, and trap, appeared 2 enormous bushes of crawfish flanked by 4 tortoises in their shells. The finest crust of Burgundy and the coasts of Arny had watered the various services of the meal, while Muscat de Languedoc was reserved for the trinkets of dessert. At the 6th service they were still serving vegetables, artichokes, and celery, and the 8th service concluded the meal with fresh almonds and candied nuts, dried and liquid jams, marzipan, iced biscuits, pastilles, and dragees. It has adopted from England the culinary delights of Christmas, from Germany its charming and poetic Christmas tree. Note 9-4, Le Rouvray. In Paris, New Year's Eve is more popular than ever, and statistics would be powerless to establish the quantity of grilled sausage consumed during the night of December 24th to 25th in the capital city. More than any other city, Paris is influenced by foreign customs. Only in the peaceful neighborhoods of Les Marais and Le Saint-Louis, away from the bustling streets of the big city, where hot roasted meats, wrapped charcuterie, cafes, and restaurants offer until morning the scent and spectacle of a great feast, is it possible to find some traces of our fathers' old ways? Aye. Cake. At Christmas time there is a significant consumption of cake, which, depending on the country, have different names. In the Vosges region, people celebrate New Year's Eve primarily with wine, brandy, and cognacs, cakes with a distinctive shape, specially made for the Christmas holiday. In Saint-Amé they say Crugne, in Dumbarton, Crugno in Jairamadco, EU, and in Rambervillas, Cognu 95. Note 95 La Vallée de Clury, p. 329. It is custom for godparents to give a coup their godchildren cognacs at Christmas. This is an advance on the New Year's gifts. The French name for this pastry, says X. Thiriet, does not exist in the Academy Dictionary. It varies from country to country. In some cities, bakers and pastry chefs offer them to their clients as New Year's gifts immediately after midnight mass. Note 966 Mr. D, baker in Welu. In Flanders, children are given quenelles, coignoles, or quaignoles on Christmas Day, oblong cakes with a gently lying sugar baby Jesus in their centre, puncturing a pink note into the golden dove. In the department of Nord, these same cakes are known as coquilles. The word cognacs and its variants may come from the German Kuchen, meaning cake. The people of Lorraine have the tradition of exchanging, at Christmas time, cogans or cognacs, types of pastries that either feature 2 croissants back to back or are longer than wide, ending in 2 croissants at their ends. Nord sent us a delicious coquille for Christmas 1906, which we admired and appreciated. It was a reminder, a memorable trip. In the Chartreuse country and in Beauce, small oval or diamond-shaped puff pastries called cochelins were served on New Year's Eve. Dusted with pink and white sugar grains, they also served as New Year's gifts. In Normandy, the poor crowd, at midnight, at the gates of farms, asking for Aguinette's New Year's gifts and singing in chorus this old couplet. Aguinette. Agignan, cut me a little bag. If you don't want to steal it, give me the whole bread. Aguinettes? Everyone knows, in Normandy, these flaky pancakes, these 2 penny cakes, cousins of the hot, kemenox, and the old norolus, cut out with a cookie cutter and taking on all sorts of shapes according to the baker's whims. What a pretty colour they have when they come out of the oven, and how they smell good. They are especially delicious when a light fire has given them an acajou tint, and they crackle under. Text-damaged, defective binding, what tempting pastries, these children's Aguinettes! In Berry 9-7, the Christmas breads or cakes were of 2 kinds, cornebucks and knowlets. The cornebucks, or beef breads, are made in farms and distributed to the poor on Christmas morning. These breads are shaped like horns or croissants. Note 97, according to Lesnel de la Salle, croyances et la genders vol. IP6. In Argentan, St. Gaultier itser. The cornabiaks are known as holes. All farmers in these regions give the poor on Christmas Day as many holes as they have farming animals, cows or horses. The nolets are those small biscuits that bakers make for Christmas Day. 98 Note 98 Bible des Noëls by Ribat de Logiripi, 15, Borges, 1857. Wouldn't all these cakes not have their origin in these Christmas loaves, a kind of tribute once paid by vassals to their lord? They are given, as much as possible, the form of a little Jesus, which in the Middle Ages was sometimes by the names of Nollet or Nollet, for no, let little Christmas. I have heard the nightingale sing a song so new, so cheerful, so beautiful, so resonant, it broke my head there, so much did it stand out, and chirped, so he took my crook, to go see Nollet. Note 100 true, Newells were mainly thrown from the galleries into the Cathedral of Rouen on Pentecost Farren. 99 Note 99 true, see Ducange's Glossarium for the term panis. We could mention many other cakes served on Christmas and Tanday. In Beauce, Niels, a kind of fritters. In Normandy, Niels 100, small waffles, somewhat similar to oblies. A light pastry made by the Guild of Oblieurs. Niliers in Rouen. They are often featured dews like oblies. Chimenarques and fuesses. In Provence, calendo and nuggets served adorned with green leaves. In Normandy, craculins, called barrettes in Valence. These types of cakes include the small white bread that, in the neighbouring region of Amons-Nivry, godparents and godmothers once offered to their godchildren at Christmas time, known in these parts as the apong cornu. One could also categorize the égaille from Vierzonshire, which Reynolds describes us in Vierzon. During the days surrounding Christmas, all bakers sell a small cake with an unusual shape called égaille laune. Note Tantwenwin Histoire du Berry Vol. I. P. 17. In our province, and in many others, adds Reynolds, special alms or certain gifts distributed in the early days of the new year are still called Gillanen, Gillanew. In Berry, farm animals receive an extraordinary provision of the best forage after midnight mass. The same is true in Lorraine and the Besants on region. In Flemish Flanders, Christmas cakes are called Kerskoeken and depict a pig or wild boar, similar to the Cognoques of Namur, the midnight feast of animals. In many countries, the animals themselves participate in the midnight feast. In a village near Besançon, in Mamiral, a few years ago, a farmer who had no religion would rise with great diligence to lead his livestock to the public watering hole just after midnight mass. He said it was necessary for his animals to have the first Christmas water. The words Gillan, Galenu mean Gwail on Nuf, Guy for the new year. Note Nuntura. There is significant debate among authors regarding this etymology. In Picardy, a few years ago, cabarets used to offer their customers kignons or kignots, a sort of apple tart in the shape of elongated croissants, on the eve of Christmas. This superstitious habit has something poetic about it, and is merely an abusive application of an admirable idea from the Christmas mystery. 104 Note Lenafortri, ABB. Upon returning from midnight mass, all animals are given a bundle of the best hay available at the stable. And from the Diocese of Besançon, we are told that in some lost parishes in the mountains of Auvergne, on Christmas occasion, all animals participate in the common festivities. Not a turtle or a pigeon is left out. The same custom exists in Brittany. The Breton farmers from Bignan, in the Diocese of Vannes, believe it is fitting that animals themselves participate in the universal joy on Christmas night, in memory of the place God assigned them, according to tradition, in the stable of Bethlehem at the time of the Nativity. In Touraine, in several villages, after midnight mass is over, everyone returns home. But before going to take their share of the festive New Year's Eve meal, the head of the household first goes to the stable, in memory of the two animals whose warm breath warmed the trembling members of the Saviour child. He gives each of his domestic animals a double ration. This is their New Year's Eve when ho 5. Note Lento fight through Mr. Ab B. The coming here below of this loving child brought joy to the earth with songs from paradise. Similarly, the believer goes to his stable to rejoice his livestock, his lambs, his sheep, from the diocese of Tours. The poet who sang so well of the bird's vigil should also sing the animal's vigil. He did so under this graceful title. The November wheat in many lands, where holy belief still lives in the heart of the happy peasant. At the hour when one sings of Jesus' birth, a custom as good as pious is observed. He gives the donkey, the bullock, a delicate provender, to the goats, the sheep, sugar or salt for every living being must, according to legend, make its vigil on Christmas night. Note 106 Comtesso Mahoney. Chapter v. Christmas gift, Christmas tree, and stocking today, it is increasingly common to give gifts to children on the occasion of the Christmas feast. One gives this custom a double origin. Some authors have sought to trace it back to the Romans, who sent each other gifts in order to begin the new year under happy auspices. The newly converted had great difficulty in discarding this pagan custom. At the end of the 4th century, St. Maximin of Turin condemned it vehemently. He reproached Christians for giving excessive gifts, sometimes even contracting debts 107. Note 107, Homily C. De Calendas Gentium, Maiden, Leve. Called 492, 493. Subsequent Christmas gradually replaced the calends of January, and was considered the beginning of the year, 108. Note 1083 in Provençal, noli sed calino or calendo for this reason. Christmas was called calendars, a name previously given to January 1st. It seems exaggerated to attribute the custom of Christmas gifts to the Romans. This Christian tradition appears to have a perfectly natural origin in the very idea of the feast. Indeed, Christmas being a day of universal joy, it is also a family festival. New Year's greetings are a consequence of this. As God has given himself as a gift to men to prove his love, men give each other signs of friendship and benevolence. Above all, parents think to delight their children in memory of the divine child Jesus, whom they show them as their best friend and their perfect model. Christmas gifts are primarily given through the Christmas tree and the Santa Claus shoe. The Christmas tree everywhere, the tree is seen as a symbol of life, abundance, and prosperity. 109, note 109. The tree plays a significant role in Christian symbolism. One has often placed side by side the tree of good and evil, the principle of human degradation, and the cross, the principle of redemption and salvation. The Christmas tree is a small green bush, usually a fir tree, to whose branches presents are attached that one wishes to distribute to children on the occasion of the feast. It appears all sparkling with lights, all laden with toys and sweetmeats. This wonderful tree is for innocent hearts the symbol of him who is the light of the world and the source of every celestial gift. This tree indeed has a Christian meaning for children. This fir tree, which remains green amidst the sorrow of nature and bears absolutely unexpected fruit, provides an opportunity to speak to little children about this Jesus who became a child for us, about this Jesus who in his manger preaches piety, obedience, and poverty. They listen as we do when we are children. Later they will remember. Who can witness, without being deeply moved by this enchanting scene of a Christmas tree in our kindergartens? Before the bewildered eyes of the very young, the verdant fir tree, illuminated with 1,000 trembling little lights, stands laden with toys and gifts that bring happiness to all these children's souls for hours. Note 110, we borrow this description of the Christmas tree from the scholarly article, so well documented, diverse, and filled with humour by Mr. George's Journal de Ruendek, 25, 1897, the English novelist Chi. To these days' playthings we sometimes add a generous distribution of warm clothing and new blankets, sweaters that cover cold little limbs, mittens that protect from frostbite, scarves in which little red noses hide from the chill, good gum boots that ring on the pavement as they glide along. And as there are no beautiful holidays without a song, we sing some of these charming, nave Christmas carols to melodies that have spanned centuries and remain just as enjoyable music one ta'en. There are violins and drums, books, work boxes, candy boxes. All sorts of boxes. There are teddy bears, hooves, spinning tops, needle cases, inkwell and imitations of apples, pears and nuts, containing surprises. In Paris, at the flower market on the quay, one can find the best value for Christmas trees. Each year, forests from France and even abroad send a considerable stock. Dickens describes the Christmas tree thusly when given. This tree, planted in the middle of a large round table and rising above the heads of the children, is beautifully illuminated by a multitude of small candles and adorned with sparkling objects. Note 11, from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. There are dolls with rosy cheeks hidden behind green leaves. There are watches, real watches, or at least with moving hands, of those watches that can be wound continuously. There are small varnished tables, small cabinets and other miniature furniture that seem prepared for the new home of a fairy. There are little men with joyful faces, much more pleasant to look at than many real men. For if you removed their heads, you would find them full of candies. In short, as one charming child whispered to another charming child, his best friend. There was everything and more. How to install and decorate a Christmas tree one must choose, in the forest, a beautiful fir tree with thick and well green branches. It is planted in a deep box filled with earth. The walls are decorated with multicolored paper or tinsel. It is good to place the tree a third of the way into the room where one is gathering, leaving enough space in front to accommodate guests, tall and small. One can set up a type of partition in a corner of the room with long, thick curtains. Finally, one accumulates, with art and good taste, all that can be found of small ribbons, favours, and garnishes the whole with numerous puffs, bows, and crosses of pink Baldock ribbon. One must, on the dark green backdrop that the fir tree offers, place glass balls or small mirrors that reflect, in countless facets, the light of the little candles suspended in the tree. Often one scatters a few handfuls of silver frost and artificial snow onto the branches. Long silver threads, called angel hair, are sometimes added as well. Behind this partition one can place a piano or an harmonium around which older brothers and sisters will sing popular, no else their voices seem to fade into a distant mystery, and sometimes mimic the angels of Bethlehem, announcing to the shepherds the arrival of the Saviour. All the accessories for a Christmas tree can be found in bazaars or toy shops at very reasonable prices. Children often prefer inexpensive items over high-priced gifts. The key is to present them beautifully and attractively, for example, using small baskets or baskets lined with percale and filled with satin in pink or blue. Decorative papers of various colours, fantasy papers with comic designs, etc., can be attached to the garlands. Sometimes a glowing star made of rubies and emeralds, or an angel with golden wings full of gifts, is placed at the top of the Christmas tree. Note 11 t'other, thick pink ribbon, flat. As for trinkets, toys, and treats to place on the Christmas tree, we certainly have a variety of options, but it's important to consider what will bring the most joy to those in attendance. Fruit and toys with surprises always have the greatest appeal. Scholars do not agree on the origin of Christmas trees. Some trace it back to pagan times. Others attribute its origins to Gaulish culture, while still others believe it comes from pure Germanic traditions. However, it is worth noting that among the many trees that held religious significance for ancient Germans, the spruce was never recorded as one of them. Pagan origin. According to a legend, Christmas trees date back to pagan peoples who celebrated the last days of the year with festivities. The spruce, called the king of forests in some German folk songs, received idolatrous worship at that time. Human sacrifices were even made to nourish its roots. One must go to extreme Scandinavia, where, in pagan times, during the Yule festivals celebrated at the end of December in honour of the earth's return to the sun, a fir tree was planted in front of the house and decorated with torches and coloured ribbons. Note 1,000 Ferrol, one must visit the beautiful forests of Mount St. Odile in Alsace to see that the fir tree truly deserves this title of honour. Note 1114. Christmas in foreign countries. p. 19. Christianity transformed this custom and appropriated it to the mystery of Christmas celebrated at this time of year. This ancient ceremony fell into disuse over the centuries. Gallic origin. The ardent missionary was well received by Gontran, king of the Burgundians. Soon the narrow confines of the old Roman castle of Annegray, which this prince had conceded to him, proved insufficient for his many disciples. Around 573, St. Columban, guided by a mysterious command from God, left Ireland, his homeland, and the monastery of Bangor, where intense studies did not hinder enthusiasm from blossoming. He left for Gaul, where the inhabitants greatly needed to be evangelized, despite Clovis conversion. A portion of the new community had to move to Luxeuil, at the foot of the Vosges Mountains. On a Christmas Eve, St. Columban took with him some of his monks and reached, while singing hymns, the summit of the mountain where an ancient fir tree, still revered by some inhabitants, stood. Despite this fact, we do not believe that the tradition of the Christmas tree was born on our old French land. We find no trace of it in our old Norman, Gascon, Burgundian, or Provençal nineties. The monks hung their lanterns and torches on the tree. One of them climbed to its top and drew a bright cross. Peasants gathered, and St. Columban told them about the wonders of the night that brought a Saviour to the world. In all our pastorals in the Officium Pastorum, even silence regarding the green starry fir tree with lights. It was not the fir, but rather the Celtic oak that was the symbolic tree par excellence in the ancient Druidic forests of Golanthin. Note 150. Noel dans les pays étrangers, p. 18. Note. German origin. About a century ago, the Christmas tree became popular in the northern regions of Germany. It was first adopted for Christmas celebrations in Norway and Sweden, and everything indicates that it was spread across Germany by the Swedes during the 30 Years' War. Perhaps the origin of the Christmas tree can be found in Alsace. In this country, the charms of poetry have enveloped all acts of public and private life. We find the earliest mention of the Christmas tree in a description of the customs of the city of Strasbourg in 1605. See p. 144. Even in 1765, Goethe, while staying in Leipzig with a friend, in front of a Christmas tree, expressed his surprise at this spectacle, which he was seeing for the first time. The following passage reads, "At Christmas it is customary in Strasbourg to set up for trees in homes. They are decorated with paper roses of various carpels, coloured wafers, sugar." Note 106. Af Weihnachten richtet man Dannenbaum zu Strasbourg in den Stuben auf. Daran henket man Rossen aus vielfarbigen Papier geschnitten, Apfeloblaten, Zichtgold, Zuckerretschalei. One of the oldest remnants of this custom is found in the essence of the Catechism published around mid-17th century by Protestant pastor Dan Haar from Strasbourg, 145. The Christmas tree was introduced to Paris in 1840 by Princess Helene of Mecklenburg, Duchess of Orleans, and later promoted by Empress Iginae. He notes that for some time in Alsace at Christmas, sweets and toys are hung on a fir tree branch for children's recreation. He states he is unaware of where this custom, which he strongly disapproves of, originated. Note 107, Catechism Milk, 1642-1646, cited by right side CP. In the same year, Prince Albert, husband of Queen Victoria, brought it to Buckingham Palace in London and made it popular among the English aristocracy and bourgeoisie. This touching and delightful tradition of the Christmas tree, perpetuated through the ages, seems today more vibrant than ever. The proof is in the vast number of fir trees that, from dawn each year, are lined up on both sides of the Madeleine in Paris. The fir trees, they're there by the hundreds, thousands, of all sizes and ages. Some are tiny, others very large with enormous roots. Those ones a few centimetres tall, those others reaching several metres. And all these Christmas trees, arranged in order, form big and little isles. It is like a miniature forest, where the eye gets lost in the dark foliage masses, where the mind resumes its search for the exquisite images of Pierre Dupont, the singer of spruces, the brilliant evocator of nature's beauties. The brave spruce defies winter and storm. Every spring makes an fan for it. Straight is its shoot and vibrant its foliage. Greek art mixes with Gothic work. A god of harmony and beauty. I adore your genius in its simplicity. Who among us has not wept in 1870 at the sight of our insolent and victorious enemies' Christmas tree? These northern men cut down the rare spruces from our groves and detached their tops. Set up in a barrel, this top became their Christmas tree. They hung apples on its branches instead of oranges, and sausages as garlands. The whole thing was illuminated by smoky candles. It was rather gloomy. Chartranians still recall the terrible fire that, on Christmas Day, destroyed Prince Napoleon's castle in Gordes. A massive tree stood in the beautiful salons. To celebrate there, Weihnachten. The Germans hung all sorts of delicacies from its branches. Everything was illuminated by numerous candles. They feasted and danced around the Christmas tree. A large audience wanted to share in the joy of Miss Bonnefoy's pupils. Mr. Gaston Lecoyne, a lawyer at the Court of Appeal, in a very witty remark about the street school and its founder, made it known that she had not been forgotten by Santa Claus as the general counsel on Mr. Duval. Arnold's proposal allocated her a subsidy of 500 francs. 2 young students of Miss Caroline Brunn delighted everyone with charming melodies, their voices perfectly placed, diction flawless, and style impeccable. The fire did not take long to break out. Soon the castle was nothing but a blaze, and woe betide the parishioners of Morences who tried to conjure the fire. In our first pamphlet we provided a lengthy description of the German Christmas tree, so we will merely cite the tree of the little street vendors and the Alsatian Lorraine Christmas tree in Paris. The Christmas tree of the little street artists in Paris on December 24th. A large hall had been graciously put at the disposal of the street school. The gathering was very beautiful. This good news was received with joy. Messrs. L., Vaillant and J. Jacquot opened the concert with a charming 4-hand piece. Mrs. Rossett Bands enchanted the audience with her talent as a fine storyteller. Mrs. Benoist brilliantly executed an etude by Liszt, and accompanied all the artists with genuine talent. The distribution of various gifts, hanging from a magnificent Christmas tree, then took place amidst general joy. All the little street vendors seemed to be at the peak of happiness. Miss Bonnefoys can be happy, and Miss Giraud proud of her students. May they continue to attend this family celebration for a long time. The Christmas tree of the Alsatians. Lorrainers in Paris there is not a single newspaper. In France, and especially in Alsace, Lorraine, that has not told at least once about this particularly touching and patriotic ceremony. As the Christmas tree holds such great honour in all Alsatian families, it was thought, soon after the year following the 1870 war, to organize a celebration that would remind the little emigrants of the joys of their homeland. Everyone knows the Association of Alsatians, Lorrainer in Paris. Since its inception, this organization has distributed millions in aid and provided work and means of existence for thousands of displaced families. Jules Clarity told the story of this feast in a café, concert hall at the Alcazar, where the little Alsatians had gathered. They had expected a few hundred, over 1,000 arrived. The girls and boys, said Jules Clarity, climbed the steps of the platform, all moved. Even after having looted the nearby shops, they soon would have nothing more to give them. They had to break the chocolate bars into pieces so that the last ones could take something away. It was Gambetta who broke these chocolate bars in half and passed them to Mrs. Floquet, who distributed them to those little outstretched hands. This family party, very modest at first, subsequently took on a considerable development. Surrounded by universal sympathy, it became a truly magnificent charitable event. Judge for yourself from the account given of it by a capital newspaper 123. Note held 22 Illustrated World Deck. On to December 25, 1881, in the afternoon, at the Hippodrome, took place the Christmas of Alsatians, Lorrainians. Patriotical memories hung over this celebration. A moved and sympathetic crowd pressed into the vast ship, beautifully decorated for the occasion. They all bore, at their centre, the arms of the cities of the annexed countries, as well as the coat of arms of the city of Paris. Note 1221. Before shipping, its roots had been carefully wrapped in a large ball of Alsatian soil. Masts around which unfurled oriflammes and tricolour flags were placed side by side. On tables positioned at the foot of these masts, piles of gifts were stacked, drawing the attention of the children's crowd seated in the middle of the ellipse. The rest of the audience was spread across the amphitheatre's bleachers. Many senators, deputies, students from the Polytechnic School, Central School. The 6,000 Alsatians and approximately 4,000 children had been summoned to this large enclosure in order to participate in the liberality that the patronesses of the organization reserved for them in the form of pleasant and useful gifts, consisting of warm clothing, items of every kind, toys and candy. At the center of the arena stood a gigantic fir tree from the forests of Alsace 121, with its massive branches adorned with national, coloured ribbons bending beneath a playful load of toys and lanterns, could be noticed there. The music of the Republican Guard and several choral societies, as interludes, performed pieces that received enthusiastic applause. Verses and patriotic songs were warmly acclaimed. Then came the procession of children who had come, accompanied by their parents, to receive donations meant for each of them from charitable hands. The benefactors retired with a sense of a sweet and precious duty of compassion fulfilled towards unfortunate brothers. The poor Alsatians realized they were still part of French territory, and that despite efforts to separate them, charity blurred new boundaries. Note 112, Le Journal de Rouen, Locke. Sit. Arcot, the most poetic revelator, as Bohr says, of the divine love manifested in the cave of Bethlehem, has left us a poetry much loved by children. This charming spectacle of the Christmas tree at the Hippodrome brings back to the poor exiles, in the sweet celebration of the Christmas tree, the living memory of their absent homeland, and those who wish to be generous towards childhood will loudly proclaim, "How good and touching are the traditions that thus enable us to do good and charity," adorned with this moved and naive poetry which, for 19 centuries, has been attached to our most popular festival, 122. Every child, he says, his little tree and candle, every child, at home with his parents, has his sweet surprise, and I have nothing. And he knocks sadly on all doors, and no one has pity on him or invites him in. It is like a snowflake, pure and delicate, that has blossomed at the edge of the Kra Chi. We will only summarize the German poet, the Christmas tree, and the poor child. Our little foreign child wanders through the magnificent streets of an unknown city. He admires the toys displayed in shop windows, the light of palaces, and the sparkling fir trees glimpsed in well-heated rooms. "Holy child Jesus," he cries out, "I have no father, no mother. You are my only one. Since nobody listens to me, come to my aid." He joins his little hands, frozen by the cold, and shivers anxiously in the street. And suddenly another little child descends towards him, surrounded by a strange light, and says, "I am the divine Jesus. Everyone repels you, but I come to you. You will also have your Christmas tree. Look." With his hand, the child Jesus shows him the sky where a gigantic, sparkling Christmas tree with stars shines. The child, whose soul is flooded with joy and peace, feels slowly, gently lifted by 1,000 little angels who detach from the wonderful tree. He returns to his true homeland, and there he forgets all the sufferings of this world. One must read this enchanting poetry in the German text to fully appreciate its sweetness. After celebrating all the charms of the Christmas tree, let's talk about the very French custom of the slipper, or sabbat, under the fireplace during midnight mass, to the greatest joy of our knave children. Aye, the Christmas slippers, the hour of the vigil has already struck. The youngest children agree to attend the midnight mass in the white chapel, that is, to sleep under their white curtains while their parents go to church. But first, deeply moved, they carefully place their slippers at the base of the cast iron heaters. During their sleep they dream of apple sugar, marionettes, candies, and toys of all kinds. Mother waits until baby is fast asleep. Then she stealthily advances and fills the cute slipper, wide open, with the objects she knows her dear little one desires. Most she has had him say it so many times. The next day, as soon as he wakes up, the child runs barefoot, his heart pounding, his eyes still heavy with sleep, and already sparkling with joy, to gaze upon the treasures, objects of all his hopes, 1903, except from an article by Framsaw's View-A-Lot. Sometimes, when children have not been wise, when they've been naughty liars, gluttonous, disobedient, or angry, little Jesus only sends a handful of switches, despite the shorter night. With what haste the father and mother stand up, as soon as dawn breaks, to watch their son awaken, to be the happy witnesses of his surprise, his exuberant joy, when he spots the toys, treats, and gifts of all kinds that little Jesus sends him through his faithful messenger, Santa Claus. Note, Huthem twitting through, readings for all deck. Who among us has not been the knave and happy victim of this trick, so imbued with maternal affection? A little girl told her mother, "I don't know why my little sister Luce always finds exactly what she wants in her Christmas shoe." "Ah, my dear lies, it's because she's always wiser than you." "Ha!" "How surprised and happy Papa and Mammon will be," said a charming baby, "when they see all that little Jesus brought me." Also, when our more fully awakened reason revealed the mystery, what a bitter disappointment, what turmoil in our childish joys! There is nothing more graceful than this fiction of the Christmas shoe, used by mothers to make their capricious babies reasonable. A well-known critic recommended it, and we want to reproduce the picture, full of freshness, that is pen-traced several years ago. It was around Christmas. The scene took place at the Amsterdam Street Market. We quote the words of the eminent writer 1224, note 124 for Sarsi. Annels Pollet it litter, due 22 data 1889. I followed a young mother who was holding by the hand a little girl. The child was delighted with the dolls and toys. She wanted to buy the entire market. "No," he softly said to his mother, "it's almost Christmas, and little Jesus will bring in your shoe what he has chosen for you. Is that where the baby Jesus comes to buy toys? The shoes will stay empty." Yes, perhaps for well-behaved children, for little children who are well-behaved. Yes, the little Jesus wants to surprise them, to reward them. Then I will be very good. What is this little Jesus doing buying toys from merchants, and mysteriously entering chimneys? Children don't really understand. What is certain is that little Jesus is not an abstraction or a symbol for them. They see him passing through the air, pressing his chest with hands full of cakes and toys. They feel him above them very good and just. They think that with him one must walk straight, otherwise. What cries of joy they will let out when they see that the little Jesus has chosen exactly what they most desired, what they had asked their mother 10 times. Sometimes the child Jesus reserves his best gifts for the poor and afflicted, as the legend of the magpies shows. So, gently he unders his shoes and places his worn out Sabbath by the cold ashes. Then he opens the window and begins to pray while looking at the sky. Once upon a time in St. Malo there lived a poor woman whose almost all her boys had drowned at sea. Only one had survived. His mother kept him close to her. One December day she fell seriously ill. Her son hears her crying. He remembers it's the eve of Christmas. Suddenly, just as the bells ring for midnight mass, he spots a glowing cloud that stops right above their house. It wasn't an ordinary cloud, or rather, it was a swarm of these sea snails known as bigornoks and eaten on the Breton coast. The first ones filled the shoes, the others covered the floor, and when space ran out in the poor room, they crawled up the wooden panels of the facade or hung onto the roof tiles. However, the poor astonished widow felt better. She quickly filled several baskets that she went to sell the next day. She had never made such good money, as no one had ever seen such beautiful, and tempting sea snails. Soon, in the country, the miracle that had taken place was known, and the old house was called the Ched des Begoniu 125 note 125 fekshri, lectures por tus lock. Then their eyelids closed in the shadow of friendly curtains. The blonde and pink babies, laughing, fell asleep, and until dawn's hour takes away the stars from the firmament, they had such a beautiful dream that they were still laughing while sleeping. Note L26 to Rostand. Our children know by heart these beautiful verses by Andre Thiriet. It is midnight. The stable is dark. The Virgin dreams, and Joseph sleeps. The child rests in this shadow, with the golden star on his forehead. Sit. Our poets often dealt with this so moving and naive topic of the Christmas shoe, just as they do every year in their bare feet, wrapped in paper. The pink babies came before the great fireplace, adorably kneeling. They worship the lovely Jesus on images. He descends from his blue sky filled with toys, and out of fear of being forgotten, the pink babies in the ashes put their little shoes, even behind a log, while unseen they prudently put on their socks and stockings. Dressed in satin and silk, his brow bound with a crimson ray, through the great black night Jesus passes like the sun. Gliding on a moonbeam, he enters homes. Only the cricket, in the brown night, sees the little shoes fill up.
Christmas!
Jesus has just been born. Beech shoes and hooves are lined up in the black hearth.
Christmas!
Children, come see the wonders that around us lie. Jesus, for the little world, rains down from the heavens high. No less graceful is the following poetry that one of our good friends from Canada sends us 127. For the naughty child who cries will receive nothing but a stern rod and a piece of bread. But Jesus brings beautiful toys to well-behaved children, books filled with pictures, and babies with gentle eyes. Note 27 Rev. Father B., who many times in our beautiful Pithiviers church has known how to interest and enchant his listeners. Last evening at the Angelus, as night spread its veil, I saw the little Jesus descend from the brightest star. On every rooftop he paused to listen. With an eternal quill, in triumphant letters, an angel wrote on his wing the names of the good little children. May they, without fear, put their shoes by the fireplace. Little Jesus, on his rounds, will be sure not to forget them. Table of Contents, Preface, Chapter 1. The Christmas Eve Vigil and the legends that accompany it. The Christmas Eve Vigil, the Meager Meal. In Arvagn, in Provence. In the Comtat, venison, in Marseille. The Great Dinner of the Arles Museum, in Brittany, Entertainment, the Pelote Party in Anjou. The Pelote Party in Normandy. The Flambart Festival in Champagne. A Christmas Eve Vigil in Rouergue. A Christmas Eve Vigil in Lorraine Country. A Christmas Eve Vigil in Paris. A pious custom at Montesquieu-Orne. Legend is inanimate beings, in French, Comté. In the Vosges, in the Cox region, in Brittany animals. In the Vosges, Chapter I, the Christmas Log, the origin of the Christmas log. In Normandy, in Provence, in Brittany. Chapter I, the peculiarities of Midnight Mass. The three Christmas Masses. The three Christmas Masses in Rome. The Midnight Mass in the village. On the way to the Midnight Mass in the Landes. In Berry, demons and superstitious beliefs in Limousin, an English poet's opinion. At Saint Michel en Gravy, in French Comté. In the Vosges, in Normandy, in Corsica, in Brittany, edifying stories. The Rose of Marienstein, Margaret of Bethlehem. The Christmas of the Departed. A Christmas Eve Vigil Dom Gay Ranger. A Midnight Mass during the Revolution. A Midnight Mass missed. A Midnight Mass in Normandy. A Midnight Mass in Picardy. The Lambs of St. Agnes in Rome. A Midnight Mass in Champagne. A Midnight Mass in Armagnac country. A Midnight Mass in Rouergue. A Midnight Mass in Provence. A Midnight Mass at Saint Victor le Bay. A Midnight Mass in Vendée. A Midnight Mass at the Isle Sur Sorgue. A Midnight Mass in Brittany. A Midnight Mass in Paris. A Midnight Mass at Ferry-Rez. The Asses Festival in Rouen. The Christmas Scala. Chapter of the New Year's Eve Supper and Christmas Cakes, the origin of New Year's Eve suppers. The Collectors. The Aguilloned in Armagnac country. A Gunnitz in Normandy. At Pla-Mel. In the Pyrenees. The Meal. In Orleans. in Anjou, in Rouergue, Poitou, in Dauphiny, in Armagnac country, in Béarn, in Auvergne, in Corsica, in the Frontry of Concox, the Christmas goose. Madame de Seavigen's New Year's Eve in Paris, Aix, in the Vosges, in Lorraine, in Flanders, in Chartrain country, in Normandy, in Berry, animals, New Year's Eve. Chapter V, Christmas gifts, the Chris tree, and the Christmas stocking origin of tip, giving. I, the Christmas tree, I, the Christmas stocking.